Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku's quirk altered his sense of mind part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. So let's start the video. Fire. Ever since he was young, Midoriya Izuku had been fascinated by it. How could it not when it had so many positives? Fire helped to keep people warm both when they were at home or camping out in the woods. It heated water so that people could wash things or clean themselves, as he always enjoyed a warm bath even in the summer. People could use fire to make the best stuff like his mother's katsudon or hot chocolate. Fire can even light up dark places and make them less scary to be in, letting you see that the monster you think is there was never there to begin with. It was used in medicine. When you had to clean something, you typically sterilized it with hot water, if not place it in a fire to ensure all the germs were gone. Fire was even used when making stuff, where most saw fire as merely destruction, like when a villain attacks. Fire is also creation, as without it, they wouldn't be able to make so many tools and cool stuff. Fire allows one to take what could be useless-looking pebbles and rocks and smelt them into the finest iron, steel or gold for tools, construction or precious jewelry. Blacksmiths figured out a long time ago that treating stuff like iron and steel with fire could increase its durability and overall usefulness. It's how people came to use fire in metaphors about proving yourself, or improvement, as you needed a little heat to get better. You need to be able to face the flames to ever make anything of yourself in life. This was something he knew well, a lesson he never needed to learn because he felt so obvious to him. But it seemed he was the only one who thought that. What was so weird about being willing to burn alive to improve? "I'm off for school, Mom." Placing his shoes on, he turned to his mother, a plump woman of a smaller build than him, as the boy had marked the point of growing taller than her when he was 13. Despite the fact she didn't have the same youthful appearance she had when he was younger, he still thought she was the most beautiful woman he knew. Inko nodded at him, giving him a tired smile as he put her coffee down. "Have a safe day, Izuku. Remember the rules." Even as a teenager, he wouldn't understand why he had them, but one look at his mother's bandaged arms was enough to remind him that he needed to be kept in check. "I will ... keep away from sources of ignition, and if I see a fire, go the other way." He was barred from being close to any fire. He wouldn't even be in the living room when his mother cooked, as the stove was a gas burner. When she was busy, he thought it would make cooking for himself a challenge. But he had learned many types of meals that didn't need him to touch the stove or the kettle. Squeezing his hands into hers, even if the feeling was a bit numb, she pulled her son into a hug, smiling at how tall he was as she could fondly remember when she would carry him to her chest. Now she couldn't even look him in the eye without looking up. "Remember your Izuku. I love you." "Love you too," Izuku replied, returning the gesture before he was out the door, rushing to make it to class on time. The warm May weather greeted him as he rushed out of the apartment before heading to the sidewalk, smiling at how warm the sun's ray felt on his skin. He hummed along to a song only he knew as he made his way to school. He wasn't in a rush, as he always left a bit early just in case something came up. That precaution paid off as he heard something happening not too far from him, which only made him smile even more as he turned to head in that direction. He knew only one thing that could be the cause of it, and lo and behold, when he turned the corner to Tatooine Station, he saw it. A villain. He wasn't the first one there, but a crowd had already formed, with the police keeping things in order as the villain raged on. Midoriya was ecstatic upon seeing him, being able to make his face and details even from a distance, as the villain had a gigantification-style quirk that made him as tall as the surrounding building, which wasn't the rarest type of quirk but was still pretty uncommon. But he knew that they could be used to devastating effort and worked great in the hands of heroes like the third-ranked hero from the United States, Godzilla. His fanboying was interrupted by how the villain knocked over a part of the overhead railing from the station, sending a section of steel falling into some of the ground. People screamed, but another rushed forward and, seemingly like a madman, stood right under it with his hands held up high to catch it, a feat that he managed without fail, as his bulky arms didn't buckle under the weight of what must have been 2 tons of steel. It's the punching hero, Death Arms. He carries out justice through his great physical strength. Someone in the crowd cried out, with others being amazed as Midoriya's eyes sparkled at the sight of the man. He might have been a local hero that he had seen around the place, even having the chance to ask for his autograph the other week, but it was still amazing to see him in person. Towards the front of the crowd, lines of water shot out and formed into a barricade of sorts, even keeping the police at the back. The source of this was a man in a costume very much inspired by conventional firefighter gear. "Everyone, please remain behind the line. This area is dangerous," the pro instructed them, his voice as calm and fluid as the water he controlled. "Even the rescue specialist, Backdraft, is here too." Amazing. Hearing that he was there too really made Midoriya eager to speak with him, as he rarely got the chance to, as the pro was often called to incidents involving fire. And Midoriya knew that he wasn't allowed to be anywhere near the stuff because it's sparked by his bad impulses. But maybe if he was lucky, he could speak with him after this and still make it to school on time. But man, being able to turn into a giant monster seems like a great quirk. He turned his attention to the two men in front of him, even as he pulled out his notebook and recorded what he was seeing. I know, right? But what did he even do? The other asked, with Midoriya eager to hear the answer, but from the look on the first guy's face, it probably wasn't going to be interesting. He got caught trying to steal a lady's purse, and when cornered, he flipped out. Midoriya frowned a little, insulted that someone with such an amazing quirk, so different and heroic compared to his own, would use it for something so petty. He started to push forward, eager to get to the front and get a better view of the action, hearing the tail end of the conversation he had been eavesdropping on as he went. A quirk like that, and he's a purse snatcher, that's underwhelming. There were other people he could hear, some commenting on the villain, on the heroes, with one guy calling his work to explain why he was late, but in this day and age, villain attacks were a dime a dozen, so he didn't think his boss would give him much flack, as his mother had been late for work a few times thanks to stuff like this. Before he could reach the front of the crowd, a shadow passed overhead, which some saw, including a group of older girls who screamed for joy. You can do it, 𝐒𝐴MUI. Hearing that name made him smile even more as he pushed through to the front, getting an up-close look at the rising star among heroes. The newly arrived 𝐒𝐴MUI Woods used his quirk to swing around the villain, avoiding his attempts to strike him and keeping silent and professional. A young and talented rising star, his quirk is so amazing, using wood like that. Midoriya continued to fanboy, with a man standing next to him only huffing and crossing his arms, amused with the kid's antics. Midoriya was extremely invested in the hero at work. Not just his speed and reflexes, which allowed him to all but dance around the villain, but also his quirk, as he never thought wood could be applied like that. He wondered if the pro tested his power against fire. Now that he thought about it, if he allowed himself to get a little burned, wood already burned pretty easily, making it a great fuel for the flames. But maybe he was a type of wood that was resistant. Maybe he trained himself to lessen that inherent weakness. How would he have done that? Maybe he burned himself over and over again to increase his durability. If that was true, then he hoped he didn't start. He could even help. No, bad thoughts. Smacking himself to the confusion of the man next to him, he went back to making notes, trying not to think about fire or burning 𝐒𝐴MUI. That was bad. He knew that well, so he shouldn't think it. Lucky for him, 𝐒𝐴MUI Woods offered up a distraction from his pyrocentric thoughts. Illegal use of your quirk during rush hour, destruction of state property, attempted robbery, and assault resulting in bodily harm. Landing on the roof of the terminal. The pro listed off the numerous crimes that the villain had committed in the last 10 minutes alone. Having made his judgment, he brought up his wood covered up, and from it, root-like growth started to form as he prepared his final move to end this fight. You are the incarnation of evil. Here it comes. Midoriya cheered. He had seen him use it before, but only on TV. He wouldn't wait to witness it in person. Show us something flashy, tree man. The man next to him also cheered out. Preemptive. Having seen him use it many times, Midoriya was able to match his wording and his eagerness. Binding lacquered chain prison. 𝐒𝐴MUI Wood's arm exploded into a swarm of branches, all of them heading towards the villain, who raised his arms to defend himself. Cannon. Then out of nowhere, another hero appeared, a blonde-haired woman of equal if not taller size to the villain. She rushed in and delivered a giant drop kick to the villain, sending him flying right off the subway line and onto a mercifully empty street with a massive thud. What? Her sudden appearance caught everyone off guard. From the civilians, Midoriya, the police, and even the pros, as 𝐒𝐴MUI Woods was left standing on the terminal roof, his super move halfway complete ... but no target anymore. The shock of her arrival didn't last long, as to his embarrassed confusion, dozens of guys in the group whipped out cameras and started taking pictures of the heroine, more accurately, a butt. Having landed in a crouch, the woman slowly got up to face them. Today is the day of my debut, she started, but Midoriya noticed that she didn't turn her body to the cameras, just her head, and kept her backside very much in view. My name is Mount Lady. A pleasure to make your acquaintance. Oh, so she wanted them to take pictures of her butt. The thought of being so blasé about it, like the men that just felt emboldened by her wordplay, made him red in the face. He looked away from the whole fan service thing happening, but instead saw something even worse. A businessman, maybe in his late 30s and looking thoroughly bored with the entire situation, was smoking a cigarette. Seeing the smoke rise from the cancer stick, his eyes focused on the small light, on the fire that burned through it even though he didn't want to. Maybe. He didn't know, but he knew he wasn't supposed to. His misgivings aside, he got a little sweaty as he was hyper-focused on that, his breathing increasing, not even noticing how things had calmed down now that the villain was defeated. His breathing increased as he felt the urge to embrace that fire, make it stronger and larger, and use it in all manner of ways, helping people by burning, "Hey, kid, you all right?" He was knocked out of his obsessive focus by the man, who shook his shoulder to get his attention. Back in reality, he reached for the back of his hand and pinched himself as hard as he could, punishing himself for that idiotic slip-up. Was that all it took? Years of his mother's instructions, and all it took was a simple cigarette to nearly make him act out again. She taught him better than that. He had to resist those urges, not embrace them like a villain. Fine, I'm fine," he squeaked out to the man, his face still red as he tried to cool himself down, even if his normal body temperature was naturally higher than what would be considered normal. "Okay." The man didn't seem to believe him, but there was some mercy for him as he didn't push things further with what Midoriya knew was suspicious behavior. He was just glad that he didn't see what he was focused on. Not wanting to waste time, he packed his notebook away, turned and ran off towards school. He'll try to get Backdraft's autograph later, away from fire, away from his urges. Since you're all third years, it's about time you all think seriously about your futures. As the teacher spoke, the class paid ample attention, while most were as Midoriya was busy drawing in his notebook. Having finished what he could about the heroes, he had taken to adding to the dozens of drawings of fire he had created. The other person who wasn't paying too much attention was a dirty blonde kid whose feet were kicked up on the desk while he leaned back. But no one said anything about this. The teacher grabbed one of the many forms from the stack he had on his desk. "I'll be handing out these forms where you'll fill in what you want to be when you grow up, and which high schools you'll be applying to." But as he paused, some of the students flashed their quirks. "You all want to be heroes, don't you?" Just like that, his gruff tone shifted to a more jovial one as he tossed the form into the air like it didn't matter. At his question, the entire class erupted in cheers as almost everyone activated their quirks, which came in all sorts of powers. From the girl who could levitate small objects, to a student who could bulk up, the kid with the extra large ears, and a girl who could turn her hand into fire. Midoriya avoided looking at her the most. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks. But remember, you can't use them on school grounds. There are rules." The teacher didn't seem all that into actually enforcing that rule, allowing them to goof off till the kid with his feet up spoke. "Sensei, don't lump us together into the same group like you're equal." His voice carried a certainty and arrogance that Midoriya sometimes hated and sometimes envied. "Unlike the rest of these losers, I'm not going to end up stuck at some bottom-of-the-barrel school." He looked up at the teacher with a smirk on his face, confident that he was the best damn student there, which didn't sit well with the others. But Bakugo Katsuki had never been one to care for the opinions or feelings of others, for both good but mainly bad. That was uncalled for, Katsuki. Yeah, where the hell do you get off saying stuff like that? You extras should just accept your role in life. Despite that pushback, Bakugo was unrepentant as he continued to hold himself far above them. Their teacher, who Midoriya realized was just the rest, didn't so much admonish his old friend for his behavior as he just fueled his ego by mentioning something. "Oh, if I remember correctly, you wish to apply to UA. Hi, Bakugo." Hearing that threw a bucket of water on the rage that the class felt towards the dirty blonde boy. How could it not, as UA wasn't just some hero school? It was regarded as the best of the best, with only Shiksu being able to call itself its rival in all things. To attend such a school, even in its general studies course, was a surefire way to set yourself up for success in life. The national school. They've been in the top 5% of schools for the last 20 years. It's a miracle just to get in. They have super strict entry requirements. Hearing all this talk about how great UA was and how much of an impossibility it would be to get into the place only made Bakugo's ego larger. And that is why you're all destined to be extras till the day you're old and gray. Uncrossing his feet, he jumped onto his desk, standing tall over the room with a smirk across his face. "I aced the mock test, as expected of the future number one. I'm the only one from this place who even has the chance to get into UA. And I'm going to surpass All Might and become the next top hero. My name will go down at the top of the highest earners." He proclaimed his goal to them all, the room falling silent as, despite his terrible attitude and penchant for not even using their names, none could ignore his potential. Not only was he the top student grade in PE, wise, but his quirk was made for hero work. Oh, Midoriya wished to go to UA as well. Strange. Bursting that bubble. The teacher made another stunning face as he stretched his head before looking Midoriya's way in confusion. Midoriya, having wished to avoid attention, sunk deeper into his chair right as the laughter started up as people looked his way with amusement or disgust, and he didn't know which was worse. Midoriya. No way. He tried to ignore that. Like you have any chance at getting in. He tried to ignore that as well, even though he knew he trained when he could. Why would they even let a villain into their school? He wasn't a villain. He'll just try and burn the place down in like a week. No, he wouldn't. He wasn't even allowed near anything that make fire. Even if it was, he wouldn't do something so evil. Who wants a villain that burns small animals for fun? One girl sneered at him, one of the few who had been with him and Bakugo since kindergarten. Hearing her bring up that age-old point, he couldn't help himself as he scrambled to his feet to defend himself. I wasn't hurting them. I wasn't trying to help. Whatever he wished to say was interrupted by 𝗵𝘃𝐻 slamming his hand down on his desk, setting off an explosion which heavily damaged the school's property and sent him scrying back in fear. He knew when Kakin was like this, there was no escaping it. "Hey, Deku." 𝗵𝘃𝐻 approached him, his hands smoking as he seemed close to jumping the boy and beating him senseless there and then. "Teacher be damned. You're even lower than the rest of the extras. Where does a villain like you get off thinking he can stand in the same ring as me?" Trying to appease him, Midoriya backed up even further to the back of the class, waving his hands about. It's not like that, Kakin, I swear. I'm not trying to fight you, honest." He lowered them, his face looking at the floor as he couldn't face him, but he couldn't lie about what he wanted either. I just want to help people, that's all." "Help? From you?" 𝗵𝘃𝐻's question hurt as if he couldn't comprehend that he would want to be a hero who helped people. "You must be dumber than you look if you think anyone would want your help from a damn arsonist." Hours later, it was the end of the school day proved to be incredibly stressful for the boy. But it was over, so he could return home, take a warm shower and do some of his breathing exercises to keep himself in check. He had to if he wanted to be a hero like his idol. With most of the class already done, Midoriya was still at his desk, a new one as Kakin trashed the last one, as he went through the news reports about the morning's incident. He wasn't able to see it all, but he was still smiling as he went through the articles, many including pictures of the incident from when it happened to when it was resolved, with the three heroes posing with the captured villain. Kamui Woods strangely absent from the shot. "I can read up more at home," he said to himself as he picked up his notebook, but before he could place it into his bag, it was snatched out of his hands. Looking up, he gulped when he saw that the person who took his book was 𝗵𝘃𝐻, who looked at its cover before scowling at him as if the book offended him. "We're not done, Deku," he told the shorter boy, holding the book out of his reach. Two of his cronies walked up to them, curious about what he was doing now. "Katsuki, what's that?" 𝗵𝘃𝐻 didn't so much as turn to them and just showed them the notebook over the shoulder, with the two leaning in to read the title Midoriya had written on it. "Ways Fire Can Help Heroes Volume 7. After reading it, the two laughed at the idea that he kept an entire book for that kind of stuff, which made Midoriya feel nothing but a deep embarrassment. Yes, he kept the book. What was the issue with that? Seriously, man, it's like he's a broken record. The other shook his head, treating him like a slow child, but he wasn't. His grades were in the top 10 of the class. "Gee, give that back." Midoriya got up and reached for the book. But again, 𝗵𝘃𝐻 held it out of reach, looking at him, then at the book in his hands. His face remained passive as he hit the book with a small explosion, to the shock and horror of Midoriya. "Why?" Midoriya cried, seeing his latest work be reduced to a burnt mess, as if to add insult to injury. 𝗵𝘃𝐻 then tossed it over his shoulder right out the window as Midoriya rushed past him as if he wished to go after it. Looking down from their class, he saw to his dismay that it had landed in the koi pond. No doubt entire pages of notes, theories, and illustrations were lost. Turning around, he found that he was still surrounded by the three, with 𝗵𝘃𝐻 the closest to him, making him nervous in a way that led to his body temperature rising. "Listen, Deku, because I'm only going to say this once. Most top-class heroes all have stories about their school days and how they were the diamonds in the rough." He started, taking a step towards him, which Midoriya reacted to by stepping back, till he was up against the windows and trying to keep himself in check. Either not noticing that Midoriya was heating up, or not caring, 𝗵𝘃𝐻 continued. "It makes them shine even brighter when they were the only ones from their school that made it, and I intend to shrine the brightest by being the only one from this dump to make it into UA. I am a perfectionist after all," 𝗵𝘃𝐻 bragged, though one of his followers looked to the side. "He's petty, that's for sure." He, however, kept that thought to himself lest the aggressive blonde turn his ire to him. "And nothing, and I mean nothing." 𝗵𝘃𝐻 placed a hand on Midoriya's shoulder, feeling that his body was warmer than it should be, but disregarding that as he added to it by using a little of his quirk, his hand starting to smoke as it burned the shorter boy's jacket. "We'll get in the way of that. Last of all, being some pyromaniac that's so fucked in the head he thinks setting fires to shit is a good thing. How you haven't ended up in jail with the rest of those loser villains is a mystery." Midoriya flinched at that. He was normal, wasn't he? "But I shorten it since I know you're not smart, Deku." 𝗵𝘃𝐻 leaned down, a smile as welcoming as a croc's on his face, which filled Midoriya with nothing but fear and anxiety, things that just made him warmer. "Don't apply to UA. After we finish our 3rd year here, I don't want to see your shitty face ever again." 𝗵𝘃𝐻 released his hold on him, leaving the boy's jacket and shirt's right shoulder burned all the way through, though he felt a bit of irritation at the fact the skin was unharmed. Sure, he wasn't trying to hurt the fucker, but he would have liked to see more damage than that. Still, he had said his piece and turned to leave the boy in his misery. Hopefully, he'll realize his place is either as some nobody or a villain that he'll take down one day, proving that he was the better of the two. As they moved to leave, Midoriya remained silent as he tried to control himself, trying to remember the rules his mother set out for him. His silence was taken another way by his bullies, who couldn't resist kicking him while he was down. Man, look at him, he can't even say something back. The other chuckled. Did you expect he would? Guy has no backbone and yet he wants to be a hero. He'll run away from villains more than we would. At the doorway into the class, Bakugo stopped, turning his head to look back at Midoriya. Hey, Deku, if you really want to be a hero that badly, there's a quirk fix to the villainous quirk you got going. What could he possibly offer him? Pray that you get something better in the next life and take a swan dive off the roof. Hearing this, Izuku felt his anger and shock rise. He knew that he and Kaken weren't close anymore, that he didn't care for him, but to suggest such a thing, and to say it so casually, it was evil. His rising emotions only added fuel to the fire as steam started leaking from his mouth and nostrils. He turned around, his emerald eyes nearly glowing. He stopped himself. He remembered the rules. He pinched the back of his hand so hard that it bled. But it did the trick as he cooled, leaving him feeling empty as Bakugo looked on. Seeing that he couldn't even say something to that, the boy dismissed him and left him alone. It took a while, but he finally managed to calm himself down to the point he wasn't a human kettle close to boiling. Leaving the class and approaching the koi pond, he muttered that he shouldn't let himself off the leash like that. Heroes don't do that, it'll upset Mom, he thought to himself when he envisioned what he wanted to do at that moment, shaking his head as he knew that was a bad impulse, just one of the many urges he couldn't let control him. At the pond, he could just watch as the fishes inside tried to eat his book, even though it was far too big to fit into their mouths. He didn't know why they bothered. It wasn't like they could bite off pieces of it. That's not food, you stupid fish. Picking up the book, he didn't care for the fish as they dispersed, as his focus on solely on his work. It didn't look too badly damaged. Bakugo's blast mainly just affected the cover, which he could always replace or cover up. But it was only when opening it that he saw the true damage. His pencil drawings looked alright. Certainly messy but not too bad. But it was the ink that was the issue, as the trip into the water had left most of it runny, reducing his carefully written notes and theories into illegible nonsense that he could barely make heads or tails on. And that was only because he wrote it so he had a clue of what was supposed to be where. That wasn't even the worst bit, as entire pages were stuck together, and his trying to pull them apart just tore them, so he wouldn't even just dry it page by page with a fan and sunlight. Concluding that the entire thing couldn't be salvaged, he signed as he placed it down and took out his phone to take pictures of what he could save so he could transplant it into another book. At least there isn't anyone else around. He got to work, carefully flipping pages and taking the best pictures his phone could manage. As he did so, he wondered about how he could make this faster. He heated the book. It'll dry it off in. No, I can't, he said to himself as he continued, thinking of how things got so bad for him, how they got to this. No matter how much he thought about it, how many times it happened, it still stung to be sitting alone. It was a beautiful day, with summer being the season. The group of 6-year-olds didn't need to go to school and could spend their days just playing, hanging out and having fun, with the park being the best place to be for a bunch of kids that lived in apartments. Midoriya had come with them, as he always did, but as it became the norm recently, they only let him join them so they could keep an eye on the villain. Even if he could never understand what made him a villain at all, he didn't do anything bad. The only thing he could think about would be the fact his quirk came in super late, as he only had it for a few months now. His 4th birthday came and went with nothing, but then his 5th came and his parent got concerned, so they took him to the doctor. He explained that he had a quirk, but he also had the extra joint in his pinky toe, which the doctor confirmed was possible, but extremely rare, as in 1 in 15,000 rare, with the confirmed cases of this occurring in Japan over the last 20 years being less than 4,000, so he was super rare. Regardless, he found himself sitting alone on a park bench, with only his limited edition All Might action figure to keep him company as the other kids played with a ball. He wanted to join them like he used to, but they never let him. With him distracted thinking of all the cool stuff All Might could do and how he could totally save the Prime Minister and fight an army of sharks at the same time, he heard one of the boys speaking up. Hey, can someone get the ball? It landed next to the fire villain. He was jolted out of his fantasy by those words, those hurtful words. Looking to the side of the bench, he saw the offending ball in question. Despite him never wanting to hurt a fly, none of the other boys wanted anything to do with him as they backed away from him, even though he was nowhere close to them. I don't want to. He'll burn me like he did the hamster. He ducked his head, trying to hide his tears and focus on the smiling All Might doll in his hands. I'm surprised he hasn't burned the ball. He loves setting things on fire. That wasn't true. He didn't like setting things on fire for no reason. He only did it to help. That was what heroes did. I heard that makes him a pyromaniac. He didn't know what that word meant, but he felt like it was making fun of him too. I'm not a villain, I was trying to help Remy. He was sick, he muttered, thinking back to the old hamster that their class was taking care of. Everyone loved Remy, Izuku among them, but when it was his turn to take him home for the weekend, he noticed that he was really sick. The teacher had told them he was a little old and would need to see the vet now and then, but he was able to help them right there and there. He didn't know why his classmate screamed when she saw him do it, or why his teacher called his mother. He hadn't done anything wrong. Are you guys that scared of Deku? Fine, I'll get the bowl. Heroes don't fear villains after all. Bakugo Katsuki, his once best friend, spoke up. Hearing him refer to him like he was a bad person so casually was the tipping point as Midoriya started to cry openly, running from the park. Look at him. Deku knows villains always run because they know they can't win. Even with the distance, he could still hear Bakugo mocking him and the others laughing. He wasn't a villain, he wasn't. He was a good boy. He did his homework, helped people, didn't use naughty words, and wanted to be like All Might. He didn't know how long he ran. All he knew was that he was back home and hugging his mother as tight as he could, crying like a baby even though he tried to stop it. For Midoriya and Co., it had been a normal enough day. She woke up, found her son watching cartoons like she expected of a child out of class, made them breakfast, and went out to do some shopping before returning home. She met up with some friends from work who insisted she change up her wardrobe, but she was fine with what she had. People called her a bit plain, but she didn't mind as she liked how she looked. She was in shape, happily married, and had a wonderful son and job, so didn't see the need to change what she looked like. She had her reservations about this, having heard that he was struggling to socialize with other kids ever since the hamster incident. Now she felt like she should have done more, as she had been cleaning a few things when the door burst open and Izuku came barreling in, crying his little heart out. Acting quickly, she wrapped the boy up in her bandaged arms and tried to soothe him, but all he could do was cry that he wasn't a villain over and over again. She knew he was a good boy, the best thing that could have happened to her, as he was a mix of all the best parts of her and her husband, and that he had a kind heart. It wasn't his fault that he got a villainous quirk, stepping up to an underpass. He slapped his cheeks to get himself out of the funk. Calm down, Izuku. They've been saying that stuff for years. You made up your mind, right? He asked himself with more pump than he felt, but he had to, or else he'd fall deeper into that hole. You're gonna do it. Be just like All Might and help people with a smile and a laugh. Remembering his idol, he did his best impression of his laugh as he walked through the underpass, halfway through when he stopped, hearing something behind him. Turning around, his fear shot through the roof as all he could see was a mass of slime that seemed to bloat out the entire place. A villain. He couldn't see what his face was in the dark, especially thanks to his mutant body altering his body to such an extent, but he could still feel his eyes on him. A medium-sized invisibility cloak. You'll do. Midoriya didn't know what that meant, and he didn't want to stick around to find out, so he turned on his heel and tried to run. Keyword, tried. Before he could take 2 steps towards the exit, the villain crashed into like a jello-like wave. Seconds later, he was trying to force him into him through his mouth and nose, suffocating him as he tried to fight back. Don't worry, I'm just gonna take your body for a little bit. Midoriya didn't hear him, too focused on his growing panic and dwindling oxygen supply. In his panic, his control over himself started to slip and his urges started to show themselves as his body rapidly heated up, approaching the boiling point of water in seconds, before going further than that. The villain could feel this. Steam started coming into contact with the portion of itself inside the boy's mouth and nose, and slowly, this is shock, he felt the buildup of steam starting to force him back. Even when he applied more force, he found that he was losing ground as the boy became hotter and harder to handle. Soon he felt his slime-like appendages also start to heat up from extended contact with the stuff as the boy continued to heat up. It was like he was a steam engine or something. This heat continued to rise as the boy seemingly was burning up from the inside out. His eyes wide yet not seeing a thing as the kid was seemingly trapped in a panic-induced self-preservation tactic as the steam continued as the boy started ripping at him. His movements doing more than before as his strength increased with the heat, allowing him to claw at him more, strip away more of him even as he tried to add even more force and get this over with. To Midoriya, he could feel this. In some corner of his freaking out mind, he could understand this, and from there, a simple solution came. Hotter. His body's temperature rose, faster than before, increasing his power as the steam was soon replaced by smoke. Heated smoke that burned the villain more than the steam did as he grit his teeth through it, hoping that his efforts would mean he gets a new body, one proving itself to be incredibly useful, but alas, the heat was too much as it started leaking out his ears and eyes. With the villain hearing a sizzling sound which to his horror, he realized was the kid's eyes. They were burning up, catching fire, and he didn't even seem to notice. He found himself having to pull back as the heat was proving too much. His body was starting to bubble and cook, and even through his slime, he could feel the heat. As he pulled back from the child, letting him fall to his knees as he took mouthfuls of air and vomited out the remaining slime in equal measure. The manhole cover he had slid out from under shot out, catching his attention as he turned to see what that cowl. No, not him, anyone but him. Midoriya wasn't in any state to notice the arrival, but he looked as well and felt his burnt eyes widen as they took in the sight of his idol, of the #1 hero himself. All Might was here. He couldn't hear it, but he saw the villain try to attack him, only to fail as the #1 dodged the strike and jumped towards them, his right first pulled back, the next part being too loud for him not to hear. Texas smash. With that one blow, All Might created so much wind pressure with just his fist that he sent the villain flying, splatting against the sides of the underpass. The villain was knocked out by the blow. That same blow doused the boy, cooling him more than an ice bath ever could. However, with the rapidly declining adrenaline and the sight of his hero in the flesh saving him, it all proved too much for Midoriya, who soundly fell flat on his face, out like a light, the green flames that had once been present rescinding back to where they came. Surrender in flames. Strange. Midoriya just had the strangest dream. He dreamt of All Might a lot, but they never had him being attacked by a villain or breaking the rules in them. Now that he thought about it, he couldn't recall when he went to bed, and would whatever tapping his face stop. Wait, tapping his face, willing himself to see and hear through the haze. He managed to make out some words. Why, hey, wake up, young man. Looking up, he saw a hulk of a man, bent over slapping his face repeatedly. Seeing that his eyes were open and had some light to them, the number one stopped. Thank goodness, I was getting a little worried. All Might? Midoriya asked, his mind still not fully functional as All Might stood back at his full height, towering over the boy. Chuckling, the man held his hand up to his face, his award-winning smile out in full. In the flesh, sorry about this. I'm normally better at keeping civilians out of harm's way, but I was so confused by the city's sewage system that I lost my way for a bit. He laughed at his joke. But I suppose that's bound to happen when you're in a new city. It was only then that Midoriya was able to fully process the fight that All Might was before him, and he promptly freaked out. All Might, scrambling. He got onto his knees before the man. He looked up at him with awe, before looking at himself and trying to fix himself up, even though along with the burn through his jacket, he was a mess. All Might didn't question him on why he called him out twice and merely went the flow. In the flesh. And might I say that you did a great job with the villain. Using your quirk without a license is typically a no-no, but context is key, and I would say you were well within the gray zone. He gave the boy a thumbs up, which confused Midoriya as he looked back at the man with a perplexed look. My quirk. He didn't use his O. He did. He remembered the feeling, the lack of air, the panic, the fear. Fall of it came down on him like a pile of bricks. If he was standing, he would have fallen to his knees as he tried to understand what he did. No, I'm not supposed to use it. I broke the rules. He scratched at his head, a nervous sweat breaking out on his face as he didn't mean to use his power. He hurt someone with it too. All Might, seeing that the boy was freaking out, believed he was in trouble, which was strange as he just told him he was in the clear. So, he tried the other option, praised the quirk itself, as that always helped calm people down. Those flames that I saw before. And I have to say, they were mighty powerful. The villain was still warm to the touch when I captured him. Behold, he held up the 2 soda bottles which he had with him. No soda was in them, but instead, it was the villain. The important bits that he could fit into the bottles anyway. Pinching himself, he did his best to calm down before he said something stupid in front of his idol. But then again, he had never thought that this day would come, that he would see All Might in the flesh. It wasn't a dream. All Might he's really here, right in front of me. He mumbled as he looked at him, at how even outside one of his many hero costumes, he still struck an inspiring figure. His smile, that hair of his that had become part of his brand. He looks even cooler in person. He screamed in his head, the inner fanboy just barely held back by his logic from making itself the outer fanboy. Looking around, he suddenly realized that he had to get something to remember this. Something to add to his All Might collection back home. The autograph. I have to get an autograph. I think my chemistry book has 𝐒𝐵 hero notebook was a no-go. He had thrown that back at school. Wait, school. He should have a workbook that he could use, so he rushed over to his backpack and pulled out the first book he could, only to open it and discover he already signed it. Across 2 whole pages, the number 1 had left his mark in a way no one could miss. Apologies if you didn't want me that particular book. I looked through your stuff to find one that had space for it. But if you have an issue, I'll happily pay for you to get another. All Might spoke up, holding out 10,000 yen for him just to take, as if he could take money from the symbol of peace. Still on his knees, he bowed to the man repeatedly. And no, it's fine. I'll cherish it forever. It would suck to have to change to a new book. But if it meant ensuring that nothing happened to this like what had occurred to his hero notebook, he'll keep it in a safe buried in the woods if he had to. Okay. All Might gave him a thumbs up before he turned around, placing the 2 bottles in his pants' larger pockets for safekeeping. Well then, I have to get this guy to the police so that can book him. He turned around and started doing some leg stretches. One couldn't mess around with it came to pulled muscles. Even the symbol of peace had to ensure he was ready before serious action. I see you on the other side of the screen, young man. Hearing this knocked Midoriya right out of fan mode, as he looked at the back of the man. Already, he couldn't leave, this was too short. Pros have many things, but time is rarely one of them. All Might replied, finishing up his stretches as he bent low, preparing to make his exit. Hearing that, Midoriya knew that he didn't have time to ask what he wanted of him, to learn what he would say about him. But I have so many questions I want to ask, about my dreams, about you, about my quirk. He knew, looking at the man's back, that if he let it, this would be the last time that the two met in person. Now, All Might started, and Midoriya did something stupid. I'm counting on your continued support. With that last word, the number 1 was off. Having jumped so fast and high he might as well be flying. All Might had done this move many times in the past, and could practically leap over tall buildings in a single bond in his sleep, which was why he was able to tell something was off with his balance. Wait, why does my leg feel like it weighs more? Looking towards his left leg, he saw to his shock the young man he had just saved, clinging to him like a baby monkey would its parent. Hey, okay, this was strange and he didn't have the time for this. I appreciate a passionate fan, but this is too much. Let go. He tried to unlatch the kid from him, but his grip remained tight on his pants. So much so he risked tearing. If I let go now, I'll die, the lad managed to say even as his mouth flapped around in the air. Hearing this, All Might stopped, remembering that not everyone can handle falling from such heights with nothing more than a laugh. You're right, all right then, hang on tight. The boy did as he was told, burying his face into his leg as the man turned to look for someone he could land. He could just carry on to the local police station, but he could feel his limit coming. He wouldn't be able to do that and still maintain his form. Now I need to find somewhere to drop this kid off before heading to the pool. His thoughts were halted when he coughed up a little blood, wiping it away. He knew he had maybe 60 seconds left for the day. Shit, he muttered before he managed to find somewhere to land. A smallish building, no taller than maybe 6 floors, but it'll do for what he needed. Coming as softly as he could, he still landed with a notable thump. Back on solid ground, Midoriya slowly unlatched from All Might's leg, falling to his hands and knees as he looked like he was about to throw up and pass out at the same time. I thought I was gonna die. Why did I think that? A good idea, he asked him aloud, and his answer was that he wasn't thinking. He had seen All Might about to leave, and just acted. All Might signed, his limit less than 20 seconds away as he turned to leave quickly. Geez, you shouldn't just grab onto people like that. You could have lost your grip and fallen and seriously hurt yourself, if not worse. He scolded the lad for his recklessness before he gestured towards the door. The reason he picked this building as it meant there was a way down to street level. He didn't wish to repeat the mistakes of his youth where he left people he saved on roofs with no way off. Anyway, if you knock on the door, I'm sure that the people inside will let you down from here, but I must be off. He walked towards the edge of the building, hearing this being enough for Izuku to collect himself enough to reach out to him. Wait. All Might, I want to ask you a question, he yelled at the man's retreating form. Sorry kid, no time. But, he reached out again but stopped himself as he looked at his hands, untouched by scars or marks, practically flawless. But the same couldn't be said for his mother's, always wrapped up, because of him, because he couldn't control his urges and burned them. He needed to know the answer to his question before it burned him up from the inside out. Can someone become like you even if they have a villainous quirk? He asked the man, putting as much force into it as he could. Hearing the question, All Might paused, if only for a second. What? Unfortunately for him, that was a second too long as he felt his form relaxing as the pain made itself known. Despite his best efforts, he could feel it slipping away as steam started to flow off him. Crap not ... now, he muttered to himself, trying to win the losing battle as the steam grew in volume. Midoriya didn't notice this, as he was looking at the floor, trying to maintain his composure as he continued to explain himself. I've wanted to help people ever since I was a kid. When I saw you saving so many with a big smile, to me, it was the coolest thing in the world. He smiled, thinking of those days when he would watch that clip over and over, never getting bored of it despite being able to recall it perfectly. Oblivious to the growing steam cloud masking All Might from view, he continued. But the thing is, I got a quirk. People don't think it's really heroic, but I know it is. People tell me that my desire to burn things is a villain's mindset, but I believe that my quirk can help people. That my flames can heal people just like I've done with small animals that I've found that were hurt or sick. But I wanted to ask you looking up. He found that his statement felt less important as the person he was talking to wasn't All Might. At least, they didn't look like All Might. Where the symbol once stood, now stood a toothpick of a man with raggy blonde hair, a bony face and eyes so far back in his skull that he could barely see them. Seeing this stranger, he did what he could, and he screamed in terror. It took him a while to collect himself, trying to figure out just what had happened. Why All Might had gotten so small. Why did he look like death could take him at any moment? Why did he give up steam like that? Why you deflated? He stumbled out, pointing at him as he pulled at his hair. No reason for this coming to mind. But how? All Might was right here. So you're All Might, you, unless you're a fake. Was he saved by an imposter? Maybe. People cosplayed pros all the time. He did it more than a few times, but no, it was too good a job. The fake got everything right, from the voice, the face, the smile, the hair, even the unbelievable strength. No one could just copy that. Right. All Might, in his weakened form, saw the boy's head getting ready to explode from the shock and confusion and decided to clear up the air, or more accurately, he had to. I am 𝐒𝐽𝐵. His statement was cut off by his mouth leaking blood like a leaky faucet, which only made Midoriya freak out even more. Are you okay? Okay, now was this imposter sick as well? What the heck was going on? Maybe he was still out, or that villain did take his body and this was just a fever dream of a dying brain. Wiping away the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand, All Might tried to give a simple explanation. You know those guys at the pool that suck in their guts and puff their chest to look more in shape than they are? Midoriya, pale-faced, nodded as he followed. It's like that. How does that even work? That didn't make sense at all. All Might didn't even have a gut to suck in. Was that what the steam was, as he was like a balloon or something? All of this was too much as Midoriya felt weak in the knees. But it can't be. All Might is fearless. He's always smiling. Hearing this, All Might looked at his hands with a distant look in his eye. Fearless and always smiling, he repeated before he sighed, taking a seat on the floor with his back to the railing of the building. Now that you've seen me like this, young man, I ask that you don't tell anyone about it or mention it online. He instructed the boy first and foremost. Midoriya wondered what more he could see as the man lifted his shirt, exposing his torso, which made Midoriya's pale face go white as he felt sick to his stomach. The left side of his body was an ugly mess of pink, red and purple flesh and scar tissue. It looked as if he had been struck by an industrial drill, electrocuted and given third-degree burns at once. All Might didn't react to the boy's horrified face. He had expected this after he saw his master and old partner's reactions to it. It happened 5 years ago, during a battle with a villain. I lost my left lung and stomach. This emaciated form is the result of the repeated surgeries needed to save my life and the after effects of the injuries themselves, he explained, keeping it short as while the boy deserved an explanation after seeing him like this, he didn't need the entire thing. Because of that, I can only maintain my All Might for around 3 hours a day. He finished, his eyes grime as he revealed that detail, something that if got out, would lead to criminals no doubt acting up as they'll just wait for him to use up his time, or all commit crimes throughout the day, with the assumption that he'll tire out before he can get to all of them. 3 hours in no way. But when he thought about it, it did line up. All Might had been seen doing her work less these days. But he and everyone else just thought he was getting old and slowing down before he eventually retired. He couldn't fathom that it was due to an injury that should have killed him. 5 years ago, was it when you fought Toxic Chainsaw? All Might let out an amused laugh. Good guess, but no, that punk couldn't scratch me. The amusement left him as he recalled who did the deed, recalled those damned evil eyes that seemed to see people as nothing but tools to use, discard or break as he saw fit. The fight and villain that did it was never reported. I asked them to not report it. He could see the question on the boy's face, so he answered it before he could ask it. All Might saves people with a smile after all. He can't be daunted by evil, he replied, his gaze turning to the city around them, spotting some people at street level just going about their day, without a care in the world. That was what he wanted for them, for everyone. That wouldn't be possible if people were scared, or villains thought they could just rampage. I smiled to show the pressure of heroes, and to hide the fear in my heart. Hearing All Might, the symbol of peace, speak in such a manner was eye-opening. He had always seemed greater, seemingly above humanity with how strong he was. No threat, no disaster or villain could topple him, make him lose that smile that always brought a sense of relief and calm wherever he went. But he was human. Looking at the wound again as All Might dropped his shirt, he wondered if maybe he could help him. His flames, they could. He knew that they could. And how many people could say they helped All Might? The shock, the horror, the disgust, the fear, all the feelings people felt towards him, expressed towards him when they heard what he could do, saw what he did, came roaring into his heart, shutting down any attempt to move towards the number one as he shamefully lowered his hand and held his peace. What was he thinking? Burning All Might. That was a villain's dream. As for your question about your quirk, Midoriya braced for disappointment, but All Might surprised him. I don't subscribe to the idea that a quirk can be inherently good or bad, heroic or villainous. It had and always will depend on how you use it. Stunned, he looked up at him and saw, despite his eyes being deep pools of black, those tiny points of blue still shine much like they would in his hero form. Your quirk had something to do with fire, right? Midoriya could do nothing but nod as the man hummed in response. Well, by that metric, Endeavor should be a villain as he has his quirk, 𝐿𝐴𝐴𝐴, right? Yet he's the number 2 hero. He's even solved more cases than me at this point. He laughed there, as despite his best efforts, he could never get the man to like him. But he could respect his drive to succeed and how many people he's saved doing it. Midoriya's composure started to break. He had expected worse, he had always gotten worse, but All Might believed in him. And the man wasn't done as he could tell this kid had issues revolving around his quirk and he wouldn't let that stand. Gang Orca keeps getting in the top 5 pros that look like they should be villains, but I can tell you right now, He's an honorable man, and between the two of us, he's a sucker for kids. He pretended to whisper at him, with Midoriya laughing even as the tears started to fall from the feeling of joy in his chest. And then, he went in for the kill, standing up, and despite the fact he was much smaller than normal, he still struck a heroic stance which awed the boy as he approached him and placed a fatherly hand on his shoulder. "Young man, if you're willing to put in the work, then yes, you can be a hero." Hearing those words that he sought for so long, that he wanted to hear someone tell him, was too much as he broke out in tears, smiling as his heart felt lighter than it had been in years. Thank you. All Might just rubbed his back, letting him have his moment. Despite the fact he had used up his time for the day, it was moments like this, helping people, that reminded him of why he did this, of his master's words on what a hero was meant to be, and it was truly rewarding. It took some time for the boy to calm down, but he did as he backed away from the pro, rubbing his face to clear away the last of the tears and snot. "Sorry for wasting your time, All Might." All Might waved it off. "None of that. Heroes are there to help people, not just save them from some villain." Midoriya smiled at that before he left, taking the stairs down. As he walked, he heard a blast in the distance, seeing as there was a window close by. He could see where it was coming from. An explosion. That was strange. They already had the giant villain that morning, and he was attacked by the sludge villain. Was there another incident already? That was more than what they expected in their relatively quiet part of Japan. He wanted to rush on over to see what the heroes would do, but there was an issue with that. Explosions means they could be fire ... but people could be in danger. He knew that his mother's rules restricted him from being anywhere close to fires, but All Might believed in him, and he was the number one. He knew he wasn't bad, and it wouldn't hurt him if he learned ways to handle fires from watching the experts in action. For that reason, he took off as fast as he could. Back on the roof, All Might had decided to take some time to rest before heading to the police station, and got a much clearer view of the explosion and rising smoke. Knowing that he wouldn't be of much help, he had to leave it to the local heroes to handle it. Right now he had. Tapping his pockets, he didn't feel the plastic bottles. Looking down, he saw that they were gone. Nowhere to be seen on the roof before a startling realization hit him. That blast, the smoke, it was in the direction that he had come from. Don't tell me. At the scene, things were a complete mess. Before, when the purse snatcher had grown into a giant and attacked, people still formed a crowd and didn't fear too much for their safety, as they trusted that the heroes would handle things. But now, most of Tatooine shopping district was absent as people ran for their lives, with continued blasts occurring randomly, shattering windows across the place, while fires were spreading from the back street that the pros were trying their hardest to keep contained. It was this, along with the building smoke, that lured Midoriya in. The idea of seeing a fire that big made his heart sing, beg for him to go there, even just to watch, to feel their warmth, to see their light, to help people through the flames just like he always wanted. As he got closer, his mother's warnings, her rules which he had lived by for years, slowly kept repeating in his mind. But they grew softer as the distance decreased, replaced with a simple desire to see it, to express himself as his excited heart kicked up in his chest. What he didn't know was that this body was starting to heat up again. With the heroes, Death Arms and 2 others had just arrived on the scene and could immediately tell that things would be a challenge for them. "Damn it, things are gotten out of hand," Death Arms muttered before he turned his gaze to the villain. Not that his entire body seemed to be made from a sludge like slime, but he seemed to be revolving around something. Know someone, as he saw a head of blonde hair. "He has a hostage," the pro next to him called out to the others, as he ground his teeth and slammed his fists together before rushing the villain, moving far faster than a man his size should be able to. Jumping into the air, he reared his fist back. "You coward." His strength was enough to break through concrete, stone and steel in equal measure, but upon impact, there wasn't a thud or even a splat. Instead, his fist sunk into the slime of the villain's body. He tried to pull back, but found that the slime was keeping a grip on him, even when he used his other hand to try and break free. "What is this?" he stated. "It's body, I can't get a grip." The villain smiled at him with those crooked yellow teeth of his before he formed some tendrils and sent them flying towards the pro. Death Arms saw the attack coming and blocked with his free hand. But he was still dislodged from the villain and sent into a store's steel shutters, crumbling the material with his body. Death Arms. The others saw this, but couldn't move to help as they noticed that the tendrils hadn't disappeared, but were coming right for them, forcing them to dodge. Crap. Seeing that the heroes couldn't approach him, much less harm him, the villain laughed. "None of you can even touch me." He was one lucky bastard, having somehow escaped from the number one. If not for this kid kicking the bottle which got the cap loose, he'd been trapped. It was made all the better as he had a powerful quirk. Bakugo didn't share his joy as she continued to struggle against the villain, putting up a good fight even if he wasn't making any real progress. He was never one to just give up. "Like hell, I'm letting you rotten sewage beat me." He fired off blasts from his hands, bigger than the ones he used before, in an attempt to free himself from the villain and turn around and blow him straight to hell. However, even with the strength of the blast which kicked up more wind and shattered whatever windows were left, when the smoke cleared, he had made no progress. The villain's smile only grew at that lack of result, as this boy was different to the other one. That one felt like he was trying to climb into a steam engine boiler and would have most likely ended painfully for him. But this one, his quirk did not affect him, and he could use it to get back at that runt that nearly burned him. This quirk, oh yeah, this one I can manage, a powerful one too. 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝐿 didn't know who he was talking about and didn't care at the moment, as he was more concerned with getting out of this mess. Seeing that his quirk was ineffective at the moment, 𝗳𝗲𝗄𝐻 turned to the other pros for a little help would be nice. His eye landed on Backdraft, but the man was too preoccupied trying to contain the fires. Sorry, I got my hands full with these fires, Backdraft called back, keeping his attention on the flames lest they spread to a gas line. Where were the fire trucks? They should be here by now. 𝗳𝗲𝗄𝐻 turned to the other one, the rising star of the area, but 𝗵𝗲𝗄𝐴 Woods was also occupied as he used his quirk to grab as many people as he could and get them out of the fire's way. I'm not good with explosions. Fire, he could handle. He trained for situations involving it, but explosions. His wood wasn't good for that, and no one wanted hundreds if not thousands of wooden shrapnel flying around. Feeling the ground thud, Midoriya arrived on the scene at the same time as another mountain of a hero. It's the rookie hero, Mount Lady. One of the people in the crowd called out as Mount Lady jogged up to the scene, but the woman's face dropped when she saw the scene, more accurately, the size of the area. Wait, I need at least 2 lanes to move. This place is too small. She could barely fit a foot into the place. If the villain was by themselves, maybe she could just step on them, but with a hostage involved, she was very limited in her options. Damn it, we just have to wait till someone with a more suitable quirk gets here. 𝗳𝗲𝗄𝐻 hated it, but that was the best he could think of at the moment. Midoriya wondered about that, as he pushed his way to the front of the crowd, with some moving away from him, telling him he was hot to the touch. His heat made it easy for him to get to the front as people started to move away from him, allowing him to see what the villain looked like and gasped from recognition. Is that? He asked himself. Wait, if he's here that means ... he got away from All Might. He was there, he saw it happen. But that's impossible. He was out. I saw him. There was no way that All Might would have lost hold of him. He never would. But then he remembered where he placed the villain, and how he grabbed onto him. Doing the math in his head, the underpass was in this general direction, relative to the building where All Might intended to drop him. I did this ... this is my fault. He escaped All Might because he accidentally freed him from the man's pants, and kept him too distracted to notice till his time had run out. He did this ... the villain was out because of him. How could he call himself good when he aided in this? As the guilt chewed away at him, his eyes went to the flames, focusing on them above all else. His mind went into a daze. He could hear them talking about a hostage, and he could even see a head sticking out of the slime, but all of it was second priority to the flames, to the smoke, and the smell of so many things burning. All of it was so enticing, inviting, as he could almost hear the flames calling to him, to approach them, to embrace them, to love them as they do him. He didn't know it, but his already warm body only got hotter as his quirk, for the 3rd time that day, acted out, as his control over it slipped looser by the second. But ... he didn't want to regain that control. Would it be so bad if he just expressed himself, all of himself, just once? Why did he have to hold back where others didn't? Steam started seeping out of his nostrils and mouth again, building in volume and heat. Another blast knocked him out of this daze, shaking his head and clearing his vision. Midoriya was now visibly sweating and short of breath as regained himself. Shaking his head further, he tried to keep a lid on it, on those villainous urges. He wouldn't let them win. Not now, when this situation was all his fault. But this turmoil of the soul, he could hear it, all of it. All the times he was denounced, all the times he was mocked, came screaming back into his head. Villain, the problem child, freak, pyromaniac, Deku. It felt like his head was going to explode. His body was only getting hotter as people in the crowd started to notice him and started moving away, pointing and calling out. But he didn't hear any of it, as the steam leaving his body only increased, escaping into the air as little embers of ash and smoke filtered through, as he could feel inside burning up. Trying to regain control, he looked through the fire and smoke. He saw the face of the hostage. He saw 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝐿, and, at that moment, he was terrified. At that moment, all of it fell away. The heroes, the noise, the crowd, even the very earth and sky. None of it mattered as he looked into those eyes. The eyes of a person who had done nothing but torment him, belittled him, and told him to jump off a roof not even 2 hours prior. Those same eyes that normally would hate and mock him were now scared, pleading for help. From the corner of his mind that he did his best to ignore, to shut away, he heard a simple message: surrender to the flames. And he did. With no plan or hesitation, he broke from the crowd, everything falling back into place as his 5 senses came alive, allowing him to hear 𝗳𝗲𝗄𝐿 yelling for him to stop. But he didn't. He couldn't, not when 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝐿 needed help and he could offer it. As his feet carried him closer to the villain, his body was burning up as steam was replaced with smoke, and his eyes, even while they started sizzling and catching fire, were flickering between their normal green hue and a glowing bright emerald. Seeing him approaching, the villain instantly recognized him. "You again." "Not this time, brat." The villain used its control over Bakugo to aim his hand towards the boy. An explosion primed and ready, which the heroes saw. "Kid," Mount Lady called out to him right as the villain brought its hand down on the boy, an explosion kicking up dust. There was silence for a moment, as the people present along with the heroes thought that just witnessed a murder. But that moment passed as there was another explosion. This one coming from where the boy had just been, where the villain's extended hand was. An explosion of green flames and smoke. The blast was stronger than anything that had happened till then, hotter, as well as the villain screamed out so loud that some present had to cover their ears. The reasons for this were made clear as the villain quickly pulled back his arm, or what was left of it, as the entire hand-like potion was gone, burned to nothing, as even the very stump, in its sludge form, was still burning as green flames licked at it. "It burns. Sweet heavens, it burns," he screamed out, feeling more pain than he had ever had, while Bakugo looked on, wide-eyed. "That Deku managed that. He burned through my tendril. How?" In the smoke, they could make out a figure, but it didn't appear to be the boy from before, as even with the dust and smoke blocking him from view, they could see a faint outline. It was as if he was on fire. As the scene cleared, revealing Midoriya to all, the civilians, the heroes, and even Bakugo could have only described what they saw with two things. The first would be awe, but the second emotion that came after that would be fear. Standing completely unharmed by the villain's attempt on his life, Midoriya's entire body had gone through a radical transformation from flesh and blood to a being of rock, magma, and fire. His skin had vanished, burned away, and in its place were purple stone-like scales, with the spaces in between glowing with green flowing magma-like blood, causing his body to be so hot that they could feel it even from a distance. His fingers had lengthened, gaining stone-lined claws, with the tips also glowing from the extreme heat. His head was covered by a flaming cobra-like hood which formed from his back and shoulders. The top of it were two green and white spots that resembled eyes so much that one could get lost in them. Especially with his head angled just even a little down made it impossible to see his true eyes. When he raised his head to the villain, he felt his heart freeze from the fear as the boy's face was gone. Much like his body, it had burned away, and in its place was a stone-like mask designed to resemble the face of a snake. Green flames leaking out of the line that was meant to be his mouth, as well as the two holes that forms his eyes. That line opened, revealing that the green stone that made up his mask was segmented. Around him, the flames that had been burning through the market flowed, as if bits of metal to a magnet. The fires that had been keeping the heroes so busy flowed and jumped right for Midoriya. The boy unhinging his jaw to accommodate the large volume of flames rushing into his body before, with a heavy thud, his jaws sealed shut, leaving not even a spark of the flames behind. "I'll save you, Kaken." When he spoke, his voice took on a mix between a roaring fire and serpent-like tone, smoke exiting with smoke as he hissed out his S sounds. The villain didn't even have time to respond as Midoriya rushed him, far faster than before. He wasn't able to try and attack him as the boy closed the distance between them. But he didn't attack him, but instead reached a hand towards Bakugo, grabbing him by the arm, and ignoring him yelling in pain from the burning grip he had on him, he pulled. With that simple action, he freed the boy and threw him back towards the heroes in the same motion. Death Arms being quick enough to catch him before doing a quick inspection of him, seeing that where the walking inferno had touched him, he had burned through his school's jacket as well as the skin, leaving a nasty burn as the Bakugo flinched from the pain of it, but also from the confused fur of what Deku had become. With the hostage free and out of the way, the villain prepared for a follow-up attack, but Midoriya didn't do that. You need to improve, you need to be made better, and that can only be done through the flames. Seemingly at his command, the fires around them that had long died out came roaring back to life, greater and hotter than ever. The pros were forced back even further, having tried to get closer now that things had calmed, with the crowd crying out in shock and fear as the heat from before had intensified. Around Midoriya, his newly conjured flames took on a green tint, the same as his own. Seeing that he had no chance against this monster, the villain tried to flee, but turning around, he found his exit cut off by a curtain of fire. If it was normal stuff, he would take his chances and just rush on through it, but these flames could burn him in seconds. Turning back to the monster, he could only beg as he saw him approaching him, each step heating the pavement in those few seconds of contact. "TL, please, mercy, don't hurt me." Midoriya didn't stop his approach, but his face mask did shift as his mouth opened just a little in mockery of what his smile would look like. Spewing out small puffs of flames and smoke with every word, he replied, "I don't wish to hurt you, I wish to help you. You have nothing to fear from the flames. The fire can guide you in the dark, warm in the cold, make you better than you yesterday." Again, no one present could tell what Midoriya was talking about, or why he chose now of all times to say what he did. But the heroes could tell something was off, but acted too late. All one needs is to embrace it. Without warning or hesitation, Midoriya's jaw shot open and from it came out a torrent of swirling green flames that engulfed the villain whole, causing him to scream in pain as it felt like every part of his being was being cooked alive before it became too much and he lost consciousness, falling to the ground with a splat as his still steaming slime body lost all cohesion or sense of control. Midoriya was confused by that, wondering why the villain screamed like he was dying. It was only some fire, nothing to write home about. Before he could understand that, his back was hit with a double burst of water from backdraft, dousing him if only a little and filling the space with heated steam as Midoriya cried out in pain and confusion. Why were the heroes attacking him? Why were they trying to douse him? Turning to the heroes while increasing the heat of his flames, he saw 𝐻𝗲𝗵𝗲 nearly on top of him with his fist reared back. He was too slow and disorientated to react to the punch that hit him right in the face, severely cracking his face mask and spilling superheated magma-like blood on the floor, where it sizzled like water dropped onto a hot stove. Why are you attacking me? 𝐻𝗲𝗵𝗲 couldn't believe this kid. After what he did, he had the gall to ask such a question, but if he wanted an answer, he'd get one. You can't be serious. You just killed a man. Cocking his head to the side, Midoriya wondered just what the man was talking about. Killed? No, I helped. He gave another smile, not noticing how unnerving it was while 𝐻𝗲𝗵𝗲 saw how the damage he managed to land at the price of burning his fist was healing, the stone shifting back into place and sealing up as if his attack never happened. Right. Midoriya looked at the crowd, and what he saw wasn't hope or relief, it was fear. The exact opposite of what All Might brought. Seeing this, messed with his head, made him question himself and his actions as his flames burned bright. No. I'm good. I know I am. My fire helps people. I helped people. He started rambling, but it was loud enough that the others could hear. You're insane, kid. You didn't help that kid or the villain. 𝐻𝗲𝗵𝗲 pointed back towards 𝗵𝘃𝗀, who was being seen 2 by 2 heroes, and then back to the villain, still out and unresponsive on the floor a ways away from the two. Seeing the burn on 𝗵𝘃𝗀's arm caused even greater confusion and imbalance in him. Gripping his head, his stone-like claws dug into his skull, causing more of his magma blood to pour from the wounds as his mind started unraveling as what he thought and what he saw was contradicting what he wanted to do. No. I'm not a villain, I'm not. I help people, I do. Like All Might, he brings smiles, I bring smiles, that I want, that's why I act. His apparent mental breakdown terrified those who saw it, more so as his flames seemed to increase in power with his emotions and insanity. Hissing out, his body heated up even further than it was already, the magma flowing between the many scales that covered his body glowing brighter, the stones themselves taking on a glow as they absorbed more of his ambient heat. I'm good, and I'll prove it. Around him, flames shot out from his body, growing to encompass most of the space as people started to run away from him. His eyes burning emerald looked at all of them as his flames consumed everything they touched, turning the pavement below him to melted slag as the pros had to retreat even further with backdraft putting his all into combating the flames. But his water evaporated long before it could even touch the boy. Through the crowd, he saw it. All Might was there, in his weakened form, watching him, holding his injured side. And he was appalled. Seeing his idol look at him like that broke something in him. And with it, his flames died out as quickly as they emerged as he fell to his knees. I'm not good. I was never good, he whispered, speaking as if it was a truth of life. A bitter pill as he felt like crying as he accepted that fact. Looking at his hands, he couldn't stop shaking as his emotions got the best of him. What have I become? I broke the rules. Why did he come? Why couldn't he just listen to his mother, to his teachers, to everyone who knew him? He couldn't be a hero. He wasn't made for it. How could he when his mere presence could scare even the number one? Losing all sense of composure, he started crying but with no tears as his body continued to lose strength as he cried for forgiveness. All Might had been involved in hundreds if not thousands of incidents, and he could say that none of them were anything close to this. He had arrived just as Midoriya had shifted forms, and had seen him save the boy, but then he saw him try and kill the villain. He very well has might as no one could check on him, all while speaking as if fire was nothing more than air, or as beneficial as a trip to the doctor. He seemed confused, as if he couldn't understand why what he had done was wrong. And in that moment, he thought back to the roof when the boy had explained his dilemma. For the first time, he wondered if he was wrong, and some quirks seemed to destine one to horrible fates as he understood that whatever this boy's quirk was, it messed with how he saw the world to the extent that fire and burning weren't bad things but rather were beneficial. And when he was confronted with that error, he started to spiral and in doing so, become an even greater issue than the villain could ever hope to be. When he created that massive pillar of fire, he had been stunned, having not felt flames so strong, even when he would on rare occasions work with endeavor. He had been about to step in, to end this even if it meant pushing his limit, but then the boy and him locked eyes ... and something died in those burning emeralds. As if by snap of the fingers, the boy fell apart, his attack, his fire, all of it vanished as he was reduced to what he was now. Not a monster that needed to be defeated. Not a villain that needed to be jailed, not a threat that needed to be worried about, but a boy in need. Taking a breath, he willed himself past his limits, changed back into his hero form and approached the boy. He ignored how the crowd that remained turned and awed at him, or even as the other heroes moved aside for him, keeping his focus on the boy who was at his lowest. My boy. He couldn't have known that he had just the wrong thing. My boy. Midoriya felt his soul turn to ice at that. He knew he scared All Might. He didn't need to tell him. He didn't want to hear it any more than he was already hearing that and so much banging around in his head. His mother, his father, his teachers, his old friends, they were all in his head already. Looking up, he didn't see All Might or the other heroes. He just saw shadows, shadows that meant him harm. He didn't want to get hurt, but he didn't want to hurt them. So he chose option 3 and screamed. What came out of his jaws wasn't a human scream. It wasn't even an animalistic one. What he screeched was closer to the sound of rock being superheated to the point of evaporating near instantly. The sound that would be heard at ground zero of an atomic blast. With that roar, fire comes flooding out of him like a broken dam. The heroes held their ears, one falling to their knees from the pain of that horrific sound, while All Might ground his teeth and took it, seeing the flames, and decided he needed to deal with that as he wound up for another punch. Texas smash. Just like before, when he defeated the slime villain, the air pressure generated by the attack blew away the flames, leaving the place a burnt and melted mess, including a massive hole in the pavement, having been melting through to the sewers, which was now puffing out steam from the water being heated to boiling. Seeing that, he realized what had just happened. Midoriya had fled. A match in the wind. In the days that followed Midoriya's meltdown and the freshly coined Tatooine incident, things had not gone well for his image. Those who didn't flee from the scene witnessed the entire thing, but to them, they only saw a crazed child try and burn both another villain and heroes alike before he fled at the sight of All Might. Worse yet, their testimony was backed by video taken by multiple people with their phones. It wasn't even a full 24 hours before the story shifted to that of a young villain's debut rampage and assault, with people advised that if they saw him, to keep their distance and report it as fast as possible. How's the arm? Kamui asked 𝗳𝗏𝗄𝐼, the man back on duty after a day off for treatment. He should still be off, but he here was better, though they had to bring in recovery girl however to handle it. 𝗳𝗏𝗄𝐼 replied, as his arms had suffered first and second degree burns from his proximity to the boy when his flames shot up in intensity. His right was the worst of the two, but a couple of kisses from the veteran hero and he was good to go, even if she wanted him to remain for a couple of days. That is a mercy in itself. You could have easily ended up like the rest of the street. Kamui shuddered as he recalled the incident site once the boy had left. The entire place looked like it had been baked in an oversized oven for hours on end. Nothing was spared, the heat or the flames, and whatever wasn't burned to ash melted. If he had tried to intervene, he wouldn't have fared well, to put it lightly. No joke. I've handled a few fire villains before, but that kid, 𝗳𝗏𝗄𝐼 recalled the scene of when the boy summoned a wall of fire, almost as tall as the buildings around them, all while that stone-like face looked on at them with a decreasing grip on reality. He was on a whole other level, a living inferno. And yet, even while looking like a cross between a snake, a volcano, and a campfire, he managed to escape. Mount Lady added. As they spent hours looking for the kid, even All Might helped, but aside from a burnt-out manhole cover 12 blocks away, he was gone. His mother didn't seem to know anything about it, Kamui replied, thinking about how he had been present when the police visited her to question her. They also hoped that the boy had returned somewhere familiar, somewhere he felt safe, but no such luck. She was shocked that he would do that, but seemed to also not be. Pardon? Mount Lady asked. She said that he's always had urges, bad thoughts which he wasn't supposed to listen to, and that fires tend to be a trigger for them. To that, 𝗳𝗏𝗄𝐼 hummed. I'm guessing he wasn't supposed to head to the incident then? He asked, to which the woodquark user nodded his head. Yeah, she didn't know what drove him to break the rules, as she was adamant. He was a good boy, just normal in the head. Kamui recalled that part quite clearly. How insistent she was that he shouldn't be blamed for his villainous quirk. Even showed them his room, which was an All Might shrine with how much merchandise the kid had collected over the years. He certainly didn't look sane. The kid couldn't even tell that burning someone alive was a bad thing. 𝗳𝗏𝗄𝐼 crossed his arms and leaned into his chair. Was it though? He looked towards Mount Lady, who didn't seem to agree with his statement. I mean, close to the end, it looked like he was more terrified than anything. She had been the furthest back, but she had gotten exceptional when it came to spotting and identifying things smaller than her when she used her quirk. And to her, the boy seemed less like he genuinely believed he was doing the right thing. Perhaps there was some truth to his words, as they had recovered the villain, expecting to find him dead, but he was fine, just unconscious. EMTs even reported that he didn't have any sufficient burn injuries and that he had been healed by the experience. It was the same deal with that Bakugo kid, as his arm was fine after less than an hour. Maybe, but that didn't change the fact he broke a bunch of laws. It's fine to wish to help, but there is a process to it, and because he didn't follow it, he wrecked the place. 𝗳𝗲𝗄𝐴𝐴𝐵 reminded her. I'm not disagreeing with any of you on that, as there is something more here. But that leaves the question, 𝗵𝗲𝗄𝐴𝐵 added, looking both in the eye. Why did he flee from All Might? The boy loved heroes, loved All Might more than any other. Yet the sight of him sent him into a fear-fueled frenzy and fled as fast as he could. That was the part he didn't understand, even after all this time. Thinking about it, the super strength user gave his theory to explain it. I would assume it's those urges you brought up, as the kid kept repeating he wasn't a villain, yet was doing villainous things. Maybe they won out in the end and he realized he had screwed himself. The kid certainly wasn't all there, at least partially. Mount Lady sighed at that. They had only recovered his backpack from the scene of the fire, which meant he didn't have a phone on him they could track or even call, leaving them with no leads on an emotionally and possibly mentally unstable student with a powerful flame quirk and apparent pyromaniac tendencies. I just hope that this is resolved soon. His mother was a mess, and I can't imagine that 3 days with no sightings of her son is doing her any good, 𝗵𝗲𝗄𝐴𝐵 uttered, shaking his head at the mess of a situation this was. The only silver lining is the fact the press is being kept back for the moment. The last thing she needs is her face blasted all over the news. He snorted dismissingly when he mentioned the press. He had long since accepted them as a fact of life, a pro, how they could rise you up and break you down in equal measure. He wouldn't say he hated them, but he did hate the fact more than a few actors and news agencies tend to go for scandalizing drama over decency. In fact, Mount Lady agreed with him. She might play into it, but that didn't mean she wasn't aware of its dangers. That's the messed up part of it, isn't it? It doesn't matter what the kid's deal is if he's a villain or not. The press will drag his entire family through the mud. She had studied instances when this happened back when she was a hero student. Her school might have been small, remote, and as poor as heck, but she had access to such materials, and it was never pretty when a villain's real name was revealed. It was part of the reason they even bothered to monikers and villain names to begin with. If not to attempt to destroy the link between them and their crimes, it was to protect any family they might have. Waking up, Midoriya felt his stomach grumbling, giving him a clue as to what brought him out of the blissful world of dreams he had been in, right in the middle of when All Might was thanking him for saving the president of the world. Getting up, he looked down from the raptors of the abandoned warehouse he had managed to fight the night before. From his perch, he could see no signs that he had been followed or anyone coming to use the place as a place to crash. Feeling his stomach grumble, even more than before, he was reminded of the fact he hadn't eaten anything in 2 days, his last meal being a couple of apples he reluctantly took from a grocer when they weren't looking. As he climbed down, the oversized coat he had managed to snag covered his body well enough, but his exposed arms and legs still peeked through as he slowly got back down to the floor. Once on solid ground, he frowned, feeling the gravel and dirt collecting on his bare feet, but it couldn't be helped. His clothes had burned to ash when he had his freak out, so he was just grateful that he managed to pull his sole piece of clothing off someone's line before he was seen. It was bad enough that he went against his mother's rules. He didn't want to disappoint her further by being caught streaking. I just couldn't help myself, and now I'm stuck in this mess. Great going, Deku. You somehow found a way to screw up that not even you thought possible. He couldn't even go home, plead forgiveness from his mother, as when he managed to double back to his apartment, after making sure he didn't leave a trail for them to follow, only for him to see that the heroes were already there. He nearly ran up to them, excited as he could be to ask them questions, for an autograph, till he remembered why they would be speaking with his mother, why there would be a police car in the front. One of them nearly saw him, and in panic, he fled without thinking, and now I have no idea where I am, he muttered to himself as his stomach groaned again. He didn't like it, but as he had no money to pay for food, he'd have to acquire it through less than moral means. I'm sorry for what I'm about to do, he muttered as he walked out of the warehouse. Sticking to back streets and alleys, he made his way through the place, avoiding people where he could, as the last thing he needed was someone spotting him. He was already suspicious enough, but at least the oversized coat covered enough of him to ensure no one thought he was just wearing that. It took him a while, but he finally made it to a market area, similar to Tatooine, which he burned. No, don't think about it, just get some food and leave. He looked around the place, trying to blend into the crowd, which seemed to be working. One of the few times he was happy. He was so both smaller than average for a boy his age and plain looking. So long as he minded himself, no one paid him any mind, focused on their affairs. Going from stall to stall, he kept his distance, as while it wouldn't be too odd for someone to compare prices and goods, he didn't strike the appearance of someone who was buying anything. So, he had to be smart about it. He also didn't want to take anything too expensive as he just needed enough to fill him for a while so he didn't have to come back. He didn't need to make a vendor's day even worse by stealing something they couldn't afford to lose. As he went from a fruit stall, he heard something. Turning to the side, he saw that a small boy, maybe 𝗂𝗵𝗲, had tripped and scraped his knee. Focusing on it, he saw the boy's mother soothe him, the young woman smiling as she pulled out disinfectant wipes and a bandage to tend to the boy. Midoriya kept his eye on them the entire time, the crowd and distance being enough that no one picked up on this hyper-focus as his eyes didn't leave the boy's cut-up knee. He could help them, couldn't he? All he'll have to do is walk over, smile like a proper hero and burn his. No, he bit his tongue, hard enough that he could taste copper in his mouth as he violently turned to face the other way, wiping the sweat from his worried and terrified brow. He refused to let himself fall for his urges again. They were the reason he was in this mess to begin with. But that was the first time they came up when seeing someone hurt before it was just fire in any of its forms. So he could avoid it, ignore it and focus on something else, pinch himself if that didn't work. He had never had such thoughts when he just saw something hurt. Someone was wrong, very wrong. He had to get something to eat and get away so he could figure it out. Lucky for him, he spotted a small bakery, with loads of baked goods being offered. Most were being kept inside the door, but there were several loaves of bread. The vendor was also busy with a customer. A glance to the side revealed that there was an alleyway, giving him an exit plan. Despite this, he felt sick to his stomach as he approached, his heart telling him to leave, to try asking anything but theft. But his stomach made itself clear. He listened to that. Once he was close enough, the vendor, who looked to be a sweet old man with candy cane-colored skin, was turning to him, his mouth moving to either greet him or tell him to wait while he waited for him to finish with the customer he already had. He didn't give him a chance as before he lost what nerve he built up. He rushed forward and grabbed 2 loaves. "Hey, stop that thief." He heard the grasp of the customer and the shout from the now angered vendor, but he didn't dare turn to look as he raced into the alley, entering the narrow space. He kept running as fast as he could, not noticing that his body was starting to heat up, his speed increasing in proportion to this rise. Turning a corner, he saw the vendor out of the corner of his eye, redder in the face than before and chasing after him, but the distance between them was pretty big. He could hear the man still coming, along with the voices of others who moved to help, but he kept his focus forward, taking turns where he could, climbing over fences to give further obstacles and even doubling back at one point to confuse them. By the time the voices had ceased with distance, he had made it to another alley. Tired, sweaty, and even hungrier than he had been before, he slumped on the wall, falling till he was sitting while he tried to collect his breath. But he had done it. He had stolen something. He'll feel guilty about it later. Right now he had to eat. Taking out the loaves, he made a face when he saw that he squashed them up during his escape, but despite looking like a lump, it was still bread. Taking out the bottle of water he picked up the other day, he saw that it still had some water in it, enough for his breakfast, lunch. With a Quirk prayer, he quickly ate half of the first loaf, throwing back water in between bites for a few minutes, only stopping when he felt full. Wiping the crumbs from his face, he looked at his remaining loot. He would need to fill the water up when he next found a fountain or public bathroom, but the bread would need something to cover it. Maybe a plastic bag from a store would do. Some of them had them at the front, and he didn't think they'd give much fuss if he grabbed one as they didn't charge for them. Yeah, that'll work. At least he now had a game plan for the next couple of hours. Put some more distance between him and the market he stole from, refill his water, and get a plastic bag. Not even he could screw that up. Walking out of the alley, after making sure he didn't look too bad, he entered the streets again and searched for a public park. It would be the best place to solve his water issue. Keeping his head down, he made some progress, till he passed by a store which had TVs out front. He would have avoided them, but when he saw a flash of green and fire, his eyes couldn't resist. It was him. He was on the news. He felt his chest constrict as he saw the story. He didn't hear anything, the TVs being muted, but he had enough context clues to guess what was happening as they showed his last yearbook photo in the top corner of footage of his freak out. He had avoided the news since he fled, but seeing himself on screen, those people running, the fires raging, the heroes being forced back, escaping from the symbol of peace and his idol. He was ecstatic. His flames they were beautiful. They covered everything and burned so bright that not even the amateur camera footage could mask that fact. His emerald flames danced on the screen with all the grace of a world-class ballet star. And there he was, standing proud, showing off his gift to the world, defeating a villain and saving someone just like a hero. He pinched himself again, his eyes shifting to and fro as he pulled the collar of his coat higher, steam starting to leak from him as his eyes flickered. No, not now. Not when there were so many people. He had to leave, get as far from here as he could. His luck ran out then. "Kid, are you all right?" Near breaking his neck, he turned to see a hero approaching him, one he vaguely recognized. You look like you're having issues. He cursed whatever force in the universe put him into this position. I'm fine. He tried to calm himself down but didn't have much success. I fine, just nervous about an upcoming test is all. He didn't lie. He did have a test coming up ... He just wouldn't be attending school to take it. Sadly for him, the pro wasn't about to let him walk off when he was clearly in distress. Are you sure? No shame in seeking help, kid. If you want, we can. His eyes shifted over him, as the taller man found his attention taken by something else. Talk. Oh no. Midoriya recalled that the TVs were still talking about him, which meant that his picture was there for him to see. The change was immediate. The man didn't make it obvious, but Midoriya had seen enough pros in the field to know when one was on guard. How he shifted his feet, the movement of the muscles through the skin-tight spandex. Kid, why don't we find somewhere we can sit and talk? You look like you need it. The pro smiled, but Midoriya wasn't fooled. I'm good. Thank you. He tried to thank him and just leave, but a firm hand grasping his arm kept him in place. Sorry kid, I can't let you do that. The pro remained calm in his arrest, as there were still people around, which was why Midoriya was trying to leave. Why couldn't he just let him do that? Let me go. He strained against the hero, who might have had some sort of strength quirk, as even as he heated up, Midoriya struggled against him. I said. He suddenly started letting out steam from his mouth and nose, catching the pro off guard. Let me go. His cry caught the attention of the people around them, who immediately tuned in to see what it was all about, and to his horror, in their eyes, they saw a villain trying to resist arrest. Putting distance between as his eyes darted all over the place, looking for an escape. The pro hissed as he flexed his hand. It wasn't burned, but the kid was hot to the touch, and he hadn't even used those flames of his yet. Damn it, even without those flames, he gets real hot. Now with the cat out of the bag, he was far more assertive. Just leave me alone, please, Midoriya begged, even as he felt himself growing hotter as he tried to keep the urges in check. That's not going to happen. You're coming with me whether you like it or not, villain. The pro was hard in his stance, but Midoriya didn't hear or see that. All he heard was that last part. I am, just like before. He rattled in his head, over and over, getting louder with every repeat as he furiously scratched at his scar. I'm not a villain. I just want to help. Just let me be. His rant only drew further attention to them as much as it drew him in just a few days later, with some taking their phones out to record. This attention shot his panic through the roof as he saw bodies, many bodies, and the flashing lights of cameras taking pictures of him as he started emitting smoke over steam, his body starting to burn up from the inside. If you're not a villain as you say, then surrender. The pro called out to him, demanding that he lay down and let them take him in before he burst into flames again. No. Midoriya didn't hear him. All he could see was All Might looking down at him with fear, before with hate he would only reserve for a villain. Midoriya was interrupted by a blast of water that knocked onto his back. With a cry of pain, the crowd and pro turned to see more heroes arriving on the scene, with one still holding her hands out to Midoriya, dousing him in the hope that they could keep him from exploding. This didn't work, seemingly taking offense to someone trying to stifle them. His flames came roaring out of him like a bat out of hell, burning his coat and body to nothing, but he remained on the floor, seeing the flames lick at his form, slowly turning him into some sort of infernal. Got people to connect the dots of who he was. And it wasn't pretty as he started hearing comments about him. It's him, the flame demon, the one that escaped All Might. He does look like a monster. Midoriya ground whatever teeth he still had in his mouth together, the bones starting to crack and buckle under the heat that was consuming him. He wasn't a monster or a demon, he was him. And he wanted to do good, he wanted to help people. Burn up. No, the crowd and pros looked on, confused over who he was talking to, as he had a battle in his head, against himself, against his urges. But they helped, right? As fire helped people. He's known that for years, didn't he? He wanted to help people and make them stronger, with his self-control weakening, and his confusion over what he was and what he wanted to do increased. His form fully changed, bursting into flames which scared some people, with the steam created by the water striking him. Few could see him, but he leapt out of it, landing a ways from the heroes. His form fully changed into his volcanic flame form, the only difference being that, unlike before, he didn't have legs but instead had a snake-like tail supporting him, making him far taller than he was before, matching the height of the hero that first approached him. Damn it, no one said that the kid could shift into a freaking snake. The water hero tried to stop him, directing her aim at his new spot, but Midoriya was fast. Slithering out of the way with seemingly little effort, he returned the favor by blasting a ball of fire at them with his mouth. The shot struck the hero, but largely hit the water tank she was carrying on her back, superheating its contents in seconds before it exploded, sending the pro flying with a scream as the others turned to her in shock. Aqua, one of them called out to her, seeing her moaning on the floor in clear pain. Leave me alone. Their direction was turned back to Midoriya, who was now hissing and snarling at them like an animal, his speech being hard to understand. This didn't matter to the heroes as they had a situation and they'll handle it like any other. The hero that had first confronted him raised his hands at him. From his back, the metallic drums he was carrying spat out steel cables that shot towards Midoriya, who avoided the first two, but the incoming three made contact, quickly wrapping around the boy to try and restrain him. The man strained against Midoriya, whose rock-like body was proving to be a challenge for him to restrain, made all the worse by the fact his fire was heating the steel cables, forcing him to exert more effort just to keep them intact. Pull and back up. Midoriya wasn't going to wait for them to arrive. He didn't understand why they were attacking him, why they wanted him to surrender when he didn't do anything wrong. Flames could help people. They did help people. He helped Bakugo, and yet he's the threat. He had enough of this. With a growl that came out like two rocks smashing and grinding together in a furnace, his body grew even hotter. This heat and stress proved too much for the steel cables, shattering them and sending pieces of red-hot metal flying all over the place, including into the crowd of onlookers, injuring some. This was enough for people to once more flee, but Midoriya didn't so much as notice. He just wanted to leave, so he breathed out more fire onto anything and everything, setting the entire street ablaze as people fled, screams ringing through the air from them. Crap, he's gonna lose it. He's gonna burn the entire place down. Get away from here. Leave the threat to the heroes. That word, threat, that stuck out over the others. Why was he the threat? Was it the fire? Fire helped people, so that couldn't be hit. But Mother said so, and he wasn't supposed to just set things on fire. But he was ... but was that bad? He didn't feel bad surrounded by the growing blaze. No, that was his urges talking. He had to ignore them, bury them like he always did ... but why did it feel so nice not to? But these contradictory thoughts racing through his skull. His started to leak out more flames, hotter and brighter than before as he roared out to the sky. His voice no longer human and akin to a rock exploding from excessive heat. With that roar, he turned to the heroes and bathed the area between them in green flames. But by the time they got through, just like at Tatooine, he was gone. An hour later, the fires had been dealt with, and witnesses were being questioned with all might present. Taking in the sight, he didn't know what to feel. The area is a ruin. Shops that once dotted the sides of the street wrecked. The bushes on the side of the road burnt to nothing, and the two cars that happened to have been closed when things spiraled out of control nothing but burnt out husks. Thankfully, when they exploded, no one was hurt. He had heard about the situation on the HN and rushed over as quickly as he could. But it seemed that he was too late as according to the police on the scene. The kid fled 8 minutes before he arrived, with law enforcement being more concerned with containing the blaze, keeping people back and tending to the wounded than to chase him down. But by the time they had someone go after him, they found a burnt-up manhole cover 3 blocks away, so they knew he escaped using the sewers again to avoid detection. They also had a pretty good idea of which direction was going in as there was a report of a methane explosion 12 blocks northwest of them, but that was it. Heroes close by had searched the area, but didn't find him as the area of the blasts was close to the outskirts of town. Close to the woods so he could have fled into them, which is trouble as he'll have plenty of places to hide in the wilderness. Perhaps if they had been more proactive in the search, they could have a solid lead on him, but as it stood, they put the lives of the people here first. He couldn't fault them for that. It was the right call to make, but still, he left him feeling frustrated about the entire thing. He had been on the case since it opened up, wishing to try and capture the boy before he went too far, but looking around, he could tell he was running out of time. His escape from the hero cable's attempt to capture sent steel cable fragments hot to the touch into the crowd and injured 9 people. Nothing serious at the moment, but that was sheer chance. It didn't help, but both the heroes' and civilians' statements didn't paint a good picture of the boy's mental state, which only added fuel to the idea that couldn't be reasoned with and would need to be taken down hard. If only things could have ended here, young Midoriya, he said to himself, which a policeman heard. I wouldn't worry about it, All Might. With you on the case, that villain's as sure as captured. He patted the much larger man on the back as he walked off, leaving All Might less assured and more annoyed by how the man referred to the kid. But he kept it to himself as Midoriya wasn't helping his case with stuff like this. Can someone become like you even if they have a villainous quirk? He recalled the boy's question, and how genuine he was in his wish to be a hero. How his eyes sparked when he heard him tell him that he could do it. But then he recalled stumbling into his rampage, how he didn't seem to be all there, as if his lucid mind was gone and replaced by instincts and urges. He had faced off against many villains, and had seen such looks in their eyes as well, looks that conveyed how they enjoyed using their quirks without restriction or care, with the worst being those that enjoyed using them on people. Midoriya had that same look, but also different. He was on cloud 9, but there was no cruelty or ego to be found in those eyeless holes in his face. As his mother said, it was as if he couldn't understand why what he was doing was wrong and saw it as a good thing. When he came to, he looked horrified, broken even. Young Midoriya. No, he was broken by him. At that moment, Midoriya had the same look All Might had seen on many villains' faces. He had seen the same frame of emotions in their eyes when they realized he had arrived on the scene. The shock, the awe, then the fear, and lastly, resignation as they accept that they're defeated before he even throws a punch. He never had seen it in the eyes of an innocent. And after he saw it, he never wished to see it again because it made him sick to his missing stomach. The boy seemed to lose all faith then and there, falling apart before he slipped through their fingers. It was only after he saw the villain's report that he realized why the boy might have thought that, as despite being bathed in flames hot enough to melt the pavement, the man was fine. Better than fine, even as the doctors compared his condition to his last known medical checkup 3 years prior and found that he was in better condition. Midoriya had been screaming that his flames helped people. Perhaps they had a healing element to them. It would certainly fit the profile, as he and the detective had found he had a history of burning small animals, but none of them were ever reported dead. It was a bitter pill to swallow, as by the time he and the police had all the pieces to the puzzle, the news had already spread about the incident, painting the boy in a villainous light, which surely wasn't helping his mental state, as it was only him paranoid and jumpy, increasing the chances for flare-ups like this. A self-feeding loop where people brand him a villain. He freaks when confronted, has a flare-up, and the media uses the latest incident as proof of his so-called true nature. I hope we find you soon, my boy, before something happens that you can't take back. He turned to leave, having seen all that he had come for. Hours later, deep in the woods, Midoriya felt like passing out. He fled as fast as he could, found a manhole, and climbed into the sewers, still on fire. And with his luck as bad as it was, he ran into a pocket of methane gas and had to deal with the explosion that caught him off guard. After that, he found that he emerged close to the tree line and didn't wait to see if the coast was clear. He just booked it, doing his best to avoid leaving a trail for anyone to follow him. Unlike when he stole the bread, he didn't stop running or slithering for 2 hours. When his transformed state burnt out, he still kept moving even though he felt like his legs and lungs were killing him. It was only now, with the sun close to setting, that he found himself slowing down. And that was more due to him burning through the calories that he had just eaten for lunch, with his clothes, water bottle, and remaining bread gone, leaving him worse off than when he woke up. All he could do now was keep moving, and hope he found somewhere he could rest for the night, preferably somewhere that wouldn't have the risk of someone seeing him in the nude, with his only guide to that possible location being the old country road he had found leading up the mountain. He didn't walk on it, as he was naked and exhausted, but he walked alongside it in the thick bush. With only 30 minutes of sunlight left, he finally dragged himself to the destination that the path led to, which was an old shrine. Its walls were damaged, in need of serious repair, and covered with plants. Stepping into the courtyard, he found that it was more of the same, as the place didn't appear to have had any guests or workers in decades. There were small statues lining the path, but they too were busted up, with just a few still recognizable as serpents or serpent men. To the sides, he made out additional buildings, with one of them burned out and another's roof having collapsed onto itself. A good place to bunker down till he figured out what the hell he was going to do now. Approaching the main building, he saw that it wasn't in great shape either, but compared to the rest, it was still stable and strong. Wiping away the exhaustion-induced sweat from his forehead, he read the sign above the entryway, Temple of the Fire God, 𝐭𝐲𝐿. He couldn't even mind the energy to panic at the fact that of all the places he could end up in, it was an abandoned temple to the very thing that he was running from. So, he just laughed at himself, at the situation, and how much fate seemed to enjoy messing with him, at all of it. He laughed so hard that he heard critters and other animals on the temple grounds run away, having heard his presence. When he finally stopped, he was just tired, hungry, and alone. With no options, he walked into the shrine and saw a statue of the god in question in the back. One barely touched the elements in the years of no care, but in front of them, in the center of the room, was a large heath, one meant to house a fire, perhaps as a means to show that the god was present, perhaps it was a sign of worship, he didn't know. All he did now was that he had nothing but depression and resignation, so he fell to his knees before the status and prayed for mercy, for his curse of a quirk to be taken from him, to see the world like how others told him he had to. He slept on the floor of the shrine, using an old tattered rag he found as a bed. As he closed his eyes, he couldn't be sure of it, but the last thing he saw was the statue, whose stone eyes seemed to light up before the cool, empty heath followed suit. As he slept, he found himself standing amongst fire, great gales, and rolling waves of green infernos. It was like watching an ocean of flames being kicked and swung about by a powerful storm. He stood in the center of it, his spot on the proverbial beach shifting so that he walked on the fire, moved as the waves rose and fell. But he felt no fear or confusion, but he was merely awed by the majesty, by the power, but the scale of such a massing of fire. To his left, he watches as the flames crash into crowds of people his mind tells him that are the sick and injured, burning them but healing them, with the retreating wave of fire leaving behind healthy and happy people who thank the flames, praise them. To his right, he sees waves of fire, just as big as those previous 𝗧𝗵𝗲 villains by the dozens, burning them, forcing them back and saving even more people. It was all magical, a land of fire, a land he would love to see. A shadow was suddenly cast over him. Looking back, he saw that the sun was bloated out by a truly giant serpent, its body so long it made buses look like clown cars. Its body wasn't made from stone and iron, with rivers of molten magma flowing its many tens of thousands of hardened scales. Every now and then, there was an eruption, as if its entire body was nothing but a collection of volcanoes. Its hooded head blanketed the area from the sun, but at the same time, illuminated the spot where he stood through the brilliance of the emerald magma and flames flowing off its body. Its slit eyes watching, seeing deeper into him that should be possible, and conveying without words a simple message. He was his power. He was his might. He could help him. He will help him. And they'll fix the world and heal its people. All he needs to do is burn it all. Flame Temple Maiden. Waking up, Midoriya felt his stomach grumbling, which he hoped didn't become a running theme for him. Looking about, he saw he was still in the abandoned temple. Feeling the breeze coming in from the door, he didn't shiver from the morning mountain wind, but it helped him remember that he was very much naked. I hope there is something around here I can wear. He blushed, grateful that he hadn't had to worry about anyone seeing him in the nude, else he might have burned the place down in embarrassment. Getting up, he used the old rag remnants of the carpet he had slept on to cover his lower half. It wasn't as if he needed to worry too much about the cold when his natural body temperature kept him warm all year old, a reason why his mother never bothered buying him jackets and jerseys. With the light of the morning sun to illuminate the place, he was able to get a better picture of the place, and like he suspected, it was well and truly abandoned for years if not decades, with how much overgrowth and disrepair lay around him. Just walking on the wooden floors was a challenge as they creaked and cracked with every step he made. With a yelp, one gave out under him, sending him to the floor face first, where his impact broke even more of the old rotten wooden flooring. Groaning, he got up and wiped off the splinters from his body, making a note to find somewhere he could shower, as 4 days on the street doesn't make for the best appearance. Frankly, it was a miracle that he wasn't made out in that crowd before he stole the bread, but he supposed the coat hid the worst of it. Continuing on his inspection of the ground, he saw that whenever he passed by a window, if it was still present, it was fogged up, making it impossible to see what was on the other side. The area that served as the baths was a mess, with most of the piping rusty and unusable, while the kitchen was just as bad, with electrical sockets long broken or retaken by nature. Trying to switch on lights, he found that not a single one worked, though most didn't have a light bulb, so he would have to remove one and carry it around to check. When it got to the attendants' quarters, he saw that what appeared to be where the men slept was partially burnt out, it being the same building with the collapsed roof, which made trying to scavenge for anything a challenge, and in the end, fruitless, as he couldn't find anything of use. Walking to the other end where the women's quarters were, he saw some of the animals had returned, including a deer which stopped drinking from the small pond, and looked his way before going back to drinking. The animal having decided he wasn't worth leaving, which he was fine with, it was a cute-looking deer. It took some build-up, but he managed to work up the courage to go through the women's quarters, rationalizing it as being abandoned and him needing whatever useful stuff he could find. The building was in better shape than the men's, with the rooms largely intact, but most were empty, their occupants having taken everything with them when they left. But he found some luck with the final room. Sliding the door open, he saw that it was more or less like the rest, but that the closet was still closed. When he opened it, he found a blessing in the form of some clothes. They were worn, clearly meant for a larger person, and very much women's clothing, but it was a hell of a lot better than the rag he was using at the moment. Because of that, he swallowed whatever misgivings he had about them before he ripped the rags off his body and quickly put on the clothing. In just a few minutes, he stepped out of the rooms and went to that pond he saw to inspect how he looked. Seeing his reflection, he couldn't help but feel ... put together was the word. He didn't know why, but seeing himself in a white 𝐒𝐭𝐲 and scarlet 𝗂𝐵𝐵 left good. He was still embarrassed to be wearing women's clothing, and it was a couple of sizes too large. But it helped him feel less stressed than he had been dealing with ever since the slime incident. Now, if only I could do something with my hair, he wondered to himself, removing the little twigs and other pieces of dirt that he had in, leaving his hair clean ... ish and very much untamed. It's not the worst spot I could have ended up in. An hour later, Izuku stood in the courtyard, looking at the place, having finished investigating. Away from people, away from possible problems ... away from mother. And he found that it was ideal for him. He hadn't heard any traffic or voices. The place was clearly off the beaten path, and besides himself, he hadn't gotten any visitors in years. A perfect spot for him to lay low, away from anyone who wanted to do him harm, anyone who would make him feel scared, away from places where he could be an issue again, but also away from his mother, who must be worried sick about him, having not seen him in close to a week. He hoped she was doing all right. It couldn't have been easy being connected to him. Heavens knew what the media was saying about him after his latest screw-up. Would she face pushback? Would the police demand she pay damages? She couldn't afford that. What about work? What if they laid her off for being the mother of a villain? Focus on what you can do, Izuku. He smacked himself. He couldn't let himself go down that rabbit hole, or else he wouldn't come out of it till he did something enormously stupid. Here and now, that was what he had to keep his focus on. That meant this rundown temple overrun by nature could collapse on his head at any minute. But he could fix that. If I'm going to be staying here, I might as well clean the place up. Even if I wasn't, it just doesn't feel right leaving this place to its fate. Yes, he might have not been the most religious who was these days, but he wouldn't say he would disrespect a place of worship, certainly not when in need of restorative work. So, he got to work, first making a list of all the things that needed to be done in order of what he was pretty sure he could do the fastest. And what was the most pressing, such as, among other things, the fragile floorboards. He didn't have a pen or pencil on him, but he had a piece of floorboard he ripped out in his blood. Was it off-putting to see a boy in shrine maiden's attire writing on a plank of wood using his bloodied finger as a pen? Yes, but it was the best thing he had. Besides, he burnt himself every time he even heated up, so the slight pinch that came from having to bite his finger and keeping the blood flowing wasn't anything to write home about. With that done, he pulled another plank of wood and, using the first as a list of supplies, he made a second list of all the supplies he'll need to carry out said repairs and badly needed maintenance work. Hopefully he'll be able to get the supplies he'll need to get running water again. Though if there was a river or stream nearby, then he'll just need a tank and buckets. Electricity was also optional, as while he got above average grades in science, he wasn't sure that he should be trying to either reconnect to the grid, not when there were sure to be tons of circuits and wiring that would need to be redone by a professional. He also included stuff for the animals, as he didn't mind so too much, but he would need to clear out pests like rodents. As he wrote that down, he felt something slithering up his leg, underneath his clothing, with got a surprised scream out of him. Whatever it was stopped when he moved, with the boy scared now that he realized that he had been so out of it that a snake managed to sneak up on him, and unless he was willing to burn his only clothes left, he wasn't going to get rid of it. His fear only grew when he felt the snake start moving again, further up his leg and then onto his stomach before its head poked out of his top. Upon its head poking out, both the reptile and Izuku froze as they observed one another. Izuku had already felt that it couldn't have been too long, as from how its body pressed against his own while it slithered, it couldn't be any longer than 80 centimeters, a little over half his height. Its body was long, but also warmer than he would have expected from a cold-blooded creature, or perhaps it was merely absorbing the abundant ambient heat he naturally gave off. Its scales were striking in their pattern and colors, as the scales along its back dorsal scales, if he was recalling biology correctly, were a bright green with leaf-like patterns across it with black blotches here and there. Its belly scales were creamy white, giving an eye-catching contrast between the two sides. But it wasn't so much its beautiful scales that gave him pause, it was its eyes. They were a striking, fiery color, the red and orange within them melding like what he would see whenever he looked into a flame that he didn't create. But that didn't detract from their exquisite nature, if anything. It added to them, as felt the same calm looking into those eyes as he would staring into a video of fire back home. It would see that the snake agreed as it didn't move. He didn't know what made him such an attractive person that a wild snake would approach him, but it seemed to be as invested in him as he was in it. The moment didn't end there, as without thinking, Midoriya raised his hand to his stomach, close to the snake but not grabbing, allowing it to make the choice. It turned its eyes to his appendage, then back to his face, studying him, trying to find any deceit or ill intent, but found none as it shifted, sliding up his arms, this time over the clothing as it slowly went up his arm before wrapping itself around his neck, where it settled with its head close to his cheek. His earlier fear gone, he couldn't help but softly laugh as he reached a hand towards its head and gently scratched it with a finger, the reptile snuggling closer to him. "At least I know snakes like me." His words received no answer, but it took that positively, as the wild animal should have something by now, perhaps bite him, hiss at him, flee, or never approached him to begin with. But it didn't, and he was grateful for that, as it meant he now had a new friend, his first friend in almost 9 years. "I wonder, are you a boy or a girl?" The snake turned its head towards him, its face giving away nothing as he rubbed the back of his head. "Right, dumb question to ask when I'm not even sure you understand. Oh." It smacked him with its tail, which hurt more than he would have expected, as returned his gaze to it. Seeing that again, there was no change, but he felt like it was annoyed with him. Did you understand that?" The green and white snake finally nodded its head, making him lean back onto the tree trunk he had been sitting against while he made his lists forgotten at the moment. Oh my god, I'm talking with an intelligent snake. Was this a quirk? Was he just insane? He didn't know, but he didn't care at the moment, as another thought popped into his head. Wait, if you understand me, that means you understood the question? He nodded again, which explained the tail slap, but he didn't see it respond, so why did it get made? Okay, then what's the answer? he asked again. Again there was no emotion on its face, which he expected, as it wasn't like it could emote like a human or even most house pets. Rather, it flicked its tongue out, pointing towards its tail. He looked at it, but didn't see anything wrong with it. Turning back to the head, it flicked its tongue out again in the direction of its tail, so he looked again, trying to see if there was anything amiss about it. Feeling its eyes on the back of his head, he didn't stop as the snake started to move its tail about like a worm, wiggling and waving it side to side, which he found to be impressive, especially for a tail that was thinner than he was a girl. He asked, recalling that male snakes tended to have longer, thicker tails when compared to females. At last, the snake seemed to confirm this by nodding its her head, pleased with him as she went back to snuggling up to his warm cheek, leaving him to chuckle. All right, now that I know your gender, what would work for a name? He asked, tapping his chin before he looked at the snake. Any ideas? He received no answer, as the reptile was content just snuggling against him for warmth. Of course, okay. He looked around for ideas, as he wasn't the most creative when it came to anything really. But there wasn't much in the way of inspiration around them except for all the plants and broken down buildings. Wait, plants could do. How about Koharu? It means green or vibrant. He asked, smiling as the snake raised her head to watch him, slowly bobbing her head as if probably thinking if she was intelligent before she licked the air and snuggled up to him, closer than him, and letting out a pleased-sounding hiss. Koharu it is then. With his new friend newly named, he felt a lot better than he had been before. But now that meant he would need to include provisions and somewhere for Koharu to sleep, as she couldn't always snuggle around his neck, even if her presence was very much welcome. Now, back to those notes. Picking up the second plank, he bit his finger again to get the blood flowing to get back to his note-making. Sometime later, Izuku, with Koharu wrapped around his neck and shoulders, was seated in the main shrine, close to the heath that remained as cold as when he first got there. He sat cross-legged as he looked over both lists, the second one having needed him to use a third plank to write all that he needed. He would be concerned for his health due to his blood's extended contact with an old, filthy piece of wood. But it wasn't like he could get sick, and if he did, all he'd need to do was strip, standing away from anything that could catch fire, and set himself ablaze. No way any germ, bacteria or virus would survive being in his body when it burned at over 300 degrees Celsius. But his mind wasn't on that. Instead, it was on the hearth, as no matter what, his eyes kept turning to hit. Even when he shifted to face the other way, he couldn't help himself when his head turned to look at it over the shoulder. It was cold, heartless, silent. But he could change that, making it warm, give it life, bring forth something that will roar and crackle. He frowned, violently turning his head away from it. He didn't want to do such an idiotic thing. With his luck, he was more likely to burn the place to the ground. Or at least, that is what he was supposed to think, but he didn't. After all, wasn't it only proper that in a temple to a fire god, a fire be lit? Why shouldn't he honor that tradition? He was already dressed for the part. Wouldn't it only be logical and right to start the flame, to keep it burning, to care for it? His mind made up. He got up, and after placing his wooden notebooks off in the corner, he left with Koharu along for the ride. He returned maybe 40 minutes later. In his arms he carried a bunch of stuff that he believed would serve as good fuel for the fire, as his quirk could start the fire. But it couldn't sustain, not unless he never left, which was a no-go. Setting things up was the easy part, as even though he avoided fire for years, that didn't stop him from extensively researching it, so he knew to place the smaller, lighter stuff that would catch fire easier, but burn out quicker in the center of the pit. Then surrounding it with heavier stuff like more wooden planks would take time to catch, but will burn for much longer. Once he finished, he did a final check of the area to ensure that nothing that could catch fire was close by. With that done, he turned to his companion. I'm about to do something crazy, Koharu, so please keep calm and don't bite me. She looked at him, her face passive and non-expressive, but he got the feeling she was confused by his request. Rolling up his sleeves, he took a deep breath to calm himself, and slowly channeled his power into his arms, keeping a harsh leash on it lest he burst out of his entire body like an inferno. It took some time, which he'd have to work on, but eventually he felt his hands heating, the blood starting to boil underneath the surface before his hands caught alight. Koharu leaned back with a hiss, shocked and fearful at seeing the fire. No. It's fine, Koharu, really. She looked at him, then at his hands, before her gaze went back to his face, somehow conveying that he was insane. Though the fact he was picking those vibes from a snake he just met lessened that effect. Yeah, this is a thing that I can do. The serpent looked at him as if he was crazy, but eventually calmed down enough to return to her usual spot. Though from how tense her muscles were against his shoulders and neck, he knew she was doing it more for him than any belief in his fire. With his green flames in hand, he approached the heath and slowly placed them underneath the wood, grabbing into the loose twigs and dry leaves which caught lit quickly. Keeping his hands there for a moment, He slowly removed them and watched as the emerald flames started to grow, shifting to a warm yellow-red color as the nature fire grew from his quirk-induced one. Seeing the flames rise and grow, he felt himself calm as his heart continued to thump away in his chest from excitement and affection. He couldn't quite place it, but he knew that in this moment of weakness, he liked it. Like a curious toddler, he crawled forward, closing the distance while Koharu stayed still, though still tense as her eyes darted from the flames to his face, seeing the effect it was having on her human. Reaching out, he felt the pleasant warmth on his skin created by this beautiful fire. Moving his legs, he got into a 𝐶𝐴 position, close to the flames and just watched them, caring for it like one would a child without much thought needed as he merely acted, carefully adding stuff to the fire whenever it was starting to wane, blowing air to increase its oxygen, poking at it to break up pieces so that they could burn easier. He didn't know how much time passed, only stopping his thoughtless motions when the snake on his shoulders licked his cheek. Something wrong, Koharu. She looked out towards the entranceway, the dark entranceway. He got up and jogged to see what happened with the light and why the sun's rays weren't visible, only for him to see the night sky instead. Did I spend the entire day tending to the fire? He asked both himself and Koharu. He thought maybe an hour had gone by, but if he was seeing things right, he had been in that one spot for at least 7 hours, not needing to drink, eat or use the bathroom, but seemingly as karma for getting lost in his task. He felt all three coming back to him with a vengeance as his stomach loudly grumbled, as well as his need to find the most favorable spot to relieve himself. Stepping out of the shrine, he stuck close to the walls as he didn't have much light to work with, but upon seeing his long shadow being cast by the healthy blaze behind him, he turned back to it for a moment. Hey, Koharu, do you think I can be like it one day? The fire, I mean, he asked his friend, the snake seemingly being confused by his question as he added some details. It's pure, bright, innocent. He wished he could return to that, but alas, it was lost to him. After his bathroom break and drinking from the same pond as the deer from earlier, Midoriya turned in for the night, taking a corner of the shrine so that he would be able to remain close to the fire while Koharu slipped off him and went to sleep in the old rag he had brought with. He would need to get her a proper bed. When he woke up the following morning, he was still hungry, but he felt better than he had in the last few days. Upon seeing the list of things he had to do, he huffed and set to work, quickly falling into routine as he cleaned the outside of the temple, cleared away debris and other garbage which he couldn't find a use for, while also regularly checking on the fire, from time to time, feeding it pieces of decayed, rotten wood as he couldn't chop down trees at the moment, and the flames needed fuel. There was more to it. His grumbling stomach made it clear that he had to find something to eat, which was only hammered home when he saw Koharu with a rat in her mouth, slowly swallowing the creature. She looked at him, as if surprised he caught her while she ate, but then went back to with what he was sure was a giggle when his stomach grumbled, as he didn't like feeling anything that could compare to jealousy. That his friend had a rat for a meal, he went out into the woods to try and find something to eat. In an hour, and quite a ways away from the temple, he found some fruit-bearing trees and root vegetables. He thanked the heavens for his find and plucked what he could before returning to the temple, where he washed the fruits and ate half of them, only sparing the seeds so that he could hopefully start growing his own. On his second look around the temple, he found an old storage shed. Busting the door open revealed that most of whatever was once inside was gone, but he did find a couple of old wooden buckets. He could use one for cleaning and the other for storing water while he got another solution. When he asked Koharu on a whim if she knew where he could get some fresh water, to his surprise, she slithered onto his shoulders and started directing him up the mountain. It wasn't the best ride, as he had to think about her signs or face being tail-whipped. But after about an hour, he started to hear it, running water, breaking from the tree line. He found a small mountain stream, the water crystal clear and shallow enough that he could have to pull his pants up to knee level to walk through it. The stream even had fish in it, small but healthy fish which he could come back to get later and have a proper meal, and from how Koharu eyed them, she was just as eager as he was to taste them, which only made him laugh as he couldn't wait to have a meal with a friend. But that needed him to prepare the kitchen. With a water source found, food collected, and a place to rest every night, his routine became set, and as the days went by, he got better at handling them. Bit by bit, while it was still tiring to collect a bucket of water every morning, it felt rewarding and served as a good exercise to keep his mind off things. He even found a clearing about 15-minute walk from the temple, large enough for him to practice without having to worry about destroying anything, and like the temple far enough from any other person that he didn't need to worry about seeing him in the nude, as he really didn't want to damage the only set of clothing he had, so he would remove it and place it in a hollow space of a tree. Slowly, his mind started to clear, and his heart didn't feel as heavy as he from sunrise to sunset. He worked, trained or cleaned the temple grounds, taking breaks to care for the fire and to hang out with his friend, who he realized was part of the reason he didn't need to worry about rodents, as she was an expert at catching them, as he felt like he would see her with at least one a day. After one of those work days, he lay on the floor of the shrine, the warm glow of the fire lighting up the space as went to sleep, happy as even his nightmares seemed to have faded into nothing but pleasant dreams, where he danced and rolled about in flames. 𝐻𝐭, you should eat. I'm not that hungry, Mitsuki sighed, having expected that response from 𝐻𝐭, even if the plate in front of her was still half full of food. To put it bluntly, the woman sitting opposite to her was a mess. They hadn't been as close as they used to be due to circumstance, but she liked to believe they were still friends, which was why 𝐻𝐭 called her after she spoke with the police after little Izuku's outburst. She was with her in that the boy couldn't be held completely responsible for what happened with the slime villain, and she eagerly waited for the call about how he came home so that she could be there for them through whatever legal bullshit needed to be done. But then Izuku didn't come home that night, which was highly irregular, as while most boys his age liked to act independently, skipped curfew, or if they were especially reckless, try any one of the many nightlife districts, Izuku wasn't like that at all. From the moment she met the kid when he was just a baby in his mother's arms, he had been obedient, easy to handle, and rather introverted, far too shy to ever attempt staying out late. Because of that, she didn't find it odd when 𝐻𝐭 filed a missing person report with the police before she went to bed, worried sick for her son. That worry only increased when she awoke the next day, followed their advice to try and continue with her day as normal, and for no news to come about Izuku's whereabouts. Both women were understandably worried. Even her brat, Katsuki, seemed to be a little off-put by his friend's disappearance. It would take 2 whole days since he was the last seen for him to be spotted. And it wasn't pretty, as his next sighting was another incident. This time there were injuries, though thankfully no deaths. Ever since, 𝐻𝐭 had been falling ever deeper into her anxieties and fears. Even with all the police in the prefecture and the 2 putting up dozens of missing person posters across town, even in the next 2 towns over there was no word about it. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Now 2 months since he was last seen. There hadn't been a single lead pointing to where, not if she refused to entertain the if, Izuku vanished off to. Because of that, Mitsuki had been coming over regularly, at first just to talk and keep 𝐻𝐭's spirit up, even being with her when she either called the police or went to the local precinct for updates on the case. But after a while, she needed to ensure that she was still taking care of herself, such as what she was doing now, as the woman had lost at least 15 kilograms, and not in a healthy way. 𝐻𝐭, for her part, couldn't bring herself to eat the meal. She knew it was good, it was a favorite, and that her friend made the effort to make it for her. But everything she tried to touch the chopsticks, she couldn't help but remember sitting at this very table with her husband and son. One gone divorced because he couldn't handle things, and other ... she didn't know. She prayed that he was alive somewhere out there, but it didn't stop the nightmares of the police coming to inform her that they found a body that they needed her to identify, or worse, he had forgotten himself and fallen to his temptations. Her eyes went to her arms, seeing the bandages that covered every part of them, leaving no visible skin. She didn't need to wear them, but she still did. Despite that, she was still compelled to slowly start to unravel them, barely paying attention to Mitsuki's surprised objections and concern as she continued to remove the white bandages before at last her flesh was visible once more, and it wasn't pretty sight. From the very tips of her fingers to her upper arm, it was nothing but scar tissue. Burnt scar tissue. Mitsuki, who was used to seeing this, didn't flinch but did reach over with her hand, which 𝐻𝐭 appreciated, even if that was diminished by how she was unknowingly giving her a picture of the stark difference between the two. Where her friend was blessed with a quirk that gave her eternally youthful, soft and smooth skin, with finely done nails with just the smidge of nail polish to them, 𝐻𝐭 didn't have nails to polish, as they had to be removed post the fire, while her flesh was dry, old and wrinkly, seemingly stretched too thin in some spots and too baggy in others. Her skin, once pale, was nothing but a collection of reds and orange. Remembering the cause of it didn't help, as it had been so normal. Izuku's 6th birthday was coming up and his quirk hadn't come in, so she booked another appointment with the doctor to see if they could see a specialist about it, as they were both worried. But then that same night, Izuku developed a fever out of nowhere, his body temperature spiking so high she thought the thermometer was broken. As she grabbed that she would need before they left for the hospital, she kept giving him chilled water and soaked a cloth, but it seemed to heat up as well, so much that it was like she placed the wet cloth on a hot plate with how much steam it was giving off. Then as she picked up her son, he burst into flames, or least parts of him did, shifting and changing as his flesh and bone melted away, replaced with volcanic limbs. But what scared her the most wasn't that she was severely burned, but it was how Izuku didn't seem to realize what had happened, as even before he just said he was little hot. Seeing her burn, he looked as if she had tried to explain high school level chemistry to him. What he said next haunts her. "Why are you crying, mommy? It's just some fire." She took a breath, and as instructed by her therapist, she cleared her mind before she spiraled. She couldn't afford to lose herself to that memory, even as she recalled how, despite her pain and panic, he was only panicking because she was. The fact his body torched itself, seemingly not even registering to him. They had to wait for the firefighters to arrive to handle him. Thankfully, they had been notified by their smoke alarm, so they arrived with little delay. Though they had to use fire retardant foam as the water hose proved ineffective at putting Izuku out. She, like the emergency responders, was worried about him and what he'd look like after being subjected to such intense heat with no protection. But when she woke up the following morning, her arms covered in casts, she was told he didn't have a scratch on him, which he proved when he walked in with a get-well present he picked out with Mitsuki, who had to explain to him why the fire even hurt her. After that, she established the rules and made sure he knew them and he followed them. For years, with few incidents such as the entire mess with the class hamster or when she caught him with small animals. But it seems she might have been kidding herself. That useless Deku, he was hiding his true strength this entire time. Katsuki growled as he landed another strike on the training dummy. It was a weekend, so he decided to do what he always did, train himself till his muscles were sore so that he could achieve his dream and become the #1. But lately, all he could think about was less his goal and more his not-so-useless classmate. Asshole hasn't been seen in 2 months after making a mess of things, and he couldn't stop thinking about that day, that look, and what he felt when he saw Deku. The villain had been scared of him and mentioned someone that only afterwards he realized was Deku. That meant that the asshole tried to go after the nerd, failed, and then went after him and was able to beat him, meaning that he was weaker than Deku. That pissed him off so much that his next blow was an open-palmed explosion, shredding most of the reinforced training dummy. Ignoring the gym owner yelling at him for breaking equipment, he went and collected one of the many spares that the gym kept in stock. Not only was a head screwy, but he could turn into that thing. He would never admit it, but even after all this time, he shivered when he recalled that day, and how Deku burst into flames, burned himself to what should have been ash and bone but instead became a walking, breathing volcano. He was strong, stronger than me. He had struggled for like 5 minutes with no results. Those pros didn't even bother because they knew they were useless. Yet Deku didn't even try that hard. He just ripped him clear before torching the bastard with that smile on his face. Those eyes. Bastard was enjoying every second of it, laughing at me for fooling me for years. He remembered how pleased he looked when he burnt the villain into a puddle. Even when he turned to see the crowd, he could see how much Deku was flaunting his power, thinking he was better than him when he was nothing more than a villain. He even fled from All Might just like any villain would. When he thought about it, Auntie had been wearing those bandages around her arms since he was 6 or 7. That was when Deku's villainous quirk came in, and he could think of only one reason why she would. His anger grew. He barely held back the explosion as he punched the new dummy, as he wouldn't have thought of it before. But it made fucking perfect sense that the villain that Deku was would burn his mother. I'll make you pay, Deku. I'll be the future #1. And I'll start that by making sure you rot in a prison like you belong. He swore to himself. A glance at a calendar hanging on a wall showed that it was July. He had 8 more months to train before UA's exam, and he planned to ace it, which meant even harsher training. He'd need it so the next time he saw that villain, he won't be the one stunned by awe.